Chapter 1. A Death. At 8:30 a.m. on Monday, March 27th, 1995, Giuseppe Onorato was sweeping up the leaves that had blown into the entryway of the building where he worked. He had arrived at 8 o'clock that morning, as he did every weekday, his first task being to swing open the two great wooden doors of the building at Via Palestro 20. The four-story Renaissance-style building housed apartments and offices and stood in one of the most elegant neighborhoods in Milan. Across the street, amid tall cedars and poplars, stretched the clipped lawns and winding paths of the Giardini Pubblici, an oasis of foliage and serenity in a smoggy, fast-paced city. Over the weekend, a warm wind had blown through the city, clearing the ever-present cap of smog and blowing the last dried leaves from the trees. Onorato had found his entryway littered with leaves that morning and hurried to sweep them up before people started coming in and out of the building. His military training had instilled in him a strong sense of order and duty, although it hadn't broken his spirit. 51 years old, he was always neatly dressed and impeccably groomed, his white mustache perfectly trimmed, his remaining hair clipped close. A Sicilian from the town of Casteldaccia. He had come north like so many others looking for work and a new life. Following his retirement from the army in 1980, after 14 years as a non-commissioned officer, Onorato had decided to settle in Milan, where he worked for several years at various odd jobs. He took the doorman's post on Via Palestro in 1989, traveling back and forth on a small motor scooter from the apartment where he lived with his wife in the northwest section of the city. A gentle man with clear blue eyes and a sweet, shy smile, Onorato kept the entryway immaculate. The 6 highly polished red granite steps that rose immediately inside the massive front doorway, the sparkling glass doors at the top of the steps, and the shiny stone floors of the foyer reflected his efforts. At the back of the foyer, Onorato had a small glassed-in cubicle made of wood with a table and chair, but he rarely sat there, preferring to keep busy with his chores. Onorato had never quite felt at ease in Milan, which had offered him work but little else. He was sensitive to the bias many northern Italians have against meridionali, or people from the south, and it took little more than a glance to make him bristle. He never talked back, and he obeyed his superiors as he had learned to do in the army, but he refused to bow his head. I am just as worthy as the next man, Onorato would think, even if he is rich or from an important family. Onorato glanced up as he swept and noticed a man across the street. Onorato had seen the man immediately that morning upon opening the two great doors. The man had been standing behind a small green parked car perpendicular to the street with its nose facing the Giardini Pubblici, away from Onorato's building. Usually cars lined the curbs of Via Palestro, one of the few streets in downtown Milan that still had free parking. The cars parked at an angle, facing the curb. It was early and the car was still alone. The license plate caught Onorato's eye because it was hanging so low it almost touched the ground. Onorato wondered what business the man had at that hour. Clean-shaven and well-dressed, the man was wearing a light brown overcoat. He kept looking down the street toward Corso Venezia, as though expecting someone. Absently stroking his own balding crown, Onorato noticed with some envy that the man had a full head of dark, wavy hair. Ever since a bomb had gone off up the street in July of 1993, he had kept his eyes open. With a blast that shook the city, a car packed with dynamite had exploded, killing 5 people, and destroying the Padiglione d'Arte Contemporanea, the modern art museum, which collapsed in a rubble of cement, steel girders, and dust. That same evening, another bomb had exploded in Rome, damaging San Giorgio Velabro, a church in the city's historic center. The bombs were later linked to an earlier explosion in Florence, on Via dei Giorgofoli, that also killed 5 people, wounded 30, and destroyed dozens of pieces of artwork that were stored in the building above the explosion. The bombings were later traced to a Sicilian mafia boss, Salvatore Totto Riina, who had been arrested earlier that year for the 1992 murder of Italy's top mafia prosecutor, Giovanni Falcone. Riina had ordered the bombings of some of Italy's most precious cultural monuments in retaliation for his arrest. He was later convicted for both the Falcone murder and the bombings, and is currently serving 2 life sentences. The Digos, Italy's political police, which has a specific mandate to move against acts of terrorism, had interviewed all the portinai, the doormen, in the Via Palestro neighborhood. Onorato had told them he'd seen a suspicious-looking camper parked near one of the gates to the park that day. From then on, he made little notes on a pad he kept in his cubicle to record everything he saw that seemed unusual. We are the eyes and ears of this neighborhood, Onorato explained to one of his army buddies, who often stopped by for coffee. We know who comes and goes, and it's part of our job to observe. Onorato turned and pulled the right-hand door toward him in order to sweep the last few leaves out from behind it. Stepping behind the door, leaving it half closed, he heard quick footsteps on the stairs, and a familiar voice call out to him, "Buongiorno!" Onorato turned to see Maurizio Gucci, who had offices upstairs on the first floor, sprinting up the entry stairs with his usual energy, his camel coat swinging. Buongiorno, Dottore, Onorato replied with a smile, lifting a hand in greeting. Onorato knew Maurizio Gucci was a member of the famous Gucci family of Florence that had founded the luxury goods firm of the same name. In Italy, the Gucci name had always been associated with elegance and style. Italians were proud of their creativity and artisan traditions, and Gucci was one of those names, along with Ferragamo and Bulgari, that symbolized quality and craftsmanship. Italy had also produced some of the world's greatest designers, such as Giorgio Armani and Gianni Versace. But Gucci was a name that went back generations, before the designers had even been born. Maurizio Gucci had been the last of the Guccis to run the family firm before selling it 2 years earlier to his financial partners, who that spring had begun to study a plan to take Gucci public. Maurizio, no longer involved in any aspect of his family business, had opened his own offices on Via Palestro in the spring of 1994. Gucci lived just around the corner in a stately palazzo in Corso Venezia, and walked to work every morning, usually arriving between 8 and 8:30. On some days, he let himself in with his own key and was already upstairs even before Onorato swung open the heavy wooden doors. Onorato often wondered wistfully what it would be like to be in Gucci's shoes. He was a rich, attractive young man with a beautiful girlfriend who was tall, thin, and blonde. She had helped Gucci furnish his offices upstairs on the first floor, as the second floor is called in Europe, with exotic Chinese antiques, elegantly upholstered sofas and armchairs, richly colored draperies, and valuable paintings. She frequently came to meet Gucci for lunch, dressed in her Chanel suits, her mane of blonde hair perfectly coiffed. To Onorato, they seemed a perfect couple with a perfect life. As Maurizio Gucci reached the top step and started to walk into the foyer, Onorato saw the dark-haired man step into the doorway. In a flash, he realized that the man had been waiting for Gucci. He wondered why the man had stopped at the foot of the stairs, where the wide, brown-bristled doormat ended and the gray cloth runner started, held in place at the base of each step with brass step rails. Gucci hadn't noticed the man step in after him, and the man did not call out his name. As Onorato watched, the man opened his coat with one hand, and with the other pulled out a gun. He straightened his arm, raised it toward Maurizio Gucci's back, and started firing. Onorato, no more than a yard away, stood frozen, broom in hand. In shock, he felt powerless to stop the man. Onorato heard 3 quick, muffled shots in fast succession. Motionless, Onorato watched in horror. He saw the first bullet enter Gucci's camel topcoat at the right hip. The second shot him just under the left shoulder. Onorato noticed how Gucci's camel coat shivered as each bullet pierced the fabric. It doesn't look that way when someone gets shot in the movies, he thought. Gucci, stunned, turned with a puzzled expression on his face. He looked at the gunman, showing no sign of recognition, then looked past him directly at Onorato as though to ask, "What is happening? Why? Why is this happening to me?" A third bullet grazed his right arm. As Gucci moaned and slumped to the floor, his attacker fired a final, fatal shot into his right temple. The gunman spun around to leave, only to stop short at the sight of Onorato staring at him in horror. Onorato saw the man's dark eyebrows rise in surprise, as though he hadn't taken Onorato's presence into consideration. The gunman's arm was still outstretched, and now it pointed directly at him. Onorato looked at the gun, noticing it had a long silencer covering the barrel. He looked at the hand grasping the gun, at the long, well-groomed fingers, the fingernails that looked as though they had been freshly manicured. For an instant that seemed an eternity, Onorato looked into the gunman's eyes. Then he heard his own voice. "No!" he cried, shrinking back, raising his left hand as though to say, "I have nothing to do with this!" The gunman fired 2 more shots directly at Onorato, then turned and ran out the door. Onorato heard a tinkling sound and realized it came from the falling bullet casings dancing on the granite floor. "Incredible," he found himself thinking. "I don't feel any pain. I didn't know that it doesn't hurt when you get shot." He wondered if Gucci had felt any pain. "So this is it," he mused. "Now I am going to die. What a shame to die like this. This is not fair," he thought. Then Onorato realized he was still standing up. He looked down at his left arm, which was hanging strangely. Blood dripped from his sleeve. Slowly, he lowered himself to sit on the first of the granite steps. "At least I didn't fall," he thought, preparing mentally to die. He thought of his wife, of his days in the army, of the view of the sea and the mountains from Casteldaccia. Then he realized he was only wounded. He had been shot twice in the arm. He was not going to die. A wave of happiness washed over him. He turned to see the lifeless body of Maurizio Gucci lying at the top of the stairs in a spreading pool of blood. Gucci was stretched out as he had fallen, lying on his right side, his head resting on his right arm. Onorato tried to scream for help, But when he opened his mouth, he couldn't hear the sound of his own voice. A few minutes later, the wailing of an approaching siren grew louder and louder, then shut off abruptly as a police car braked to a screeching halt in front of Via Palestro 20. 4 uniformed carabinieri jumped out, weapons drawn. "It was a man with a gun," moaned Onorato weakly from his seat on the first step, as the men rushed toward him. Chapter 2. The Gucci Dynasty. The Gucci Dynasty. Bright red blood spatters formed Jackson Pollock-like patterns on the doors and the white walls on either side of the entryway where Maurizio lay. A scattering of shell casings had fallen on the floor. The proprietor of a kiosk across the street in the Giardini Pubblici had heard Onorato cry out and quickly called the carabinieri. "That is Dottor Gucci," said Onorato to the officers, using his right arm to gesture up the steps to Maurizio's motionless body while his left arm hung limply. "Is he dead?" One of the carabinieri knelt by Maurizio's body and pressed his fingers to Maurizio's neck, nodding when he found no pulse. Maurizio's lawyer, Fabio Franchini, who had arrived a few minutes earlier for an appointment, huddled disconsolately on the cold floor next to Maurizio's body, and stayed there for the next 4 hours while law enforcement officials and paramedics worked around him. As ambulances and more police cars arrived, a small crowd of curious onlookers formed in front of the building. The paramedics attended quickly to Onorato, whisking him away in one of the ambulances just before the homicide squad of the Carabinieri arrived on the scene. Corporal Giancarlo Togliatti, a tall, lanky, blonde officer with 12 years' experience in the homicide division, began to examine Maurizio's body. In the past few years, Togliatti's main job had been investigating murders among warring clans of Albanian immigrants who had moved into Milan. This was his first case among the city's elite. It wasn't every day that a leading businessman was gunned down in cold blood in the center of town. "Who is the victim?" asked Togliatti as he bent down. "That's Maurizio Gucci," one of his colleagues told him. Togliatti looked up, smiling quizzically. "Right, and I'm Valentino," he said sardonically, naming the perpetually suntanned, dark-haired Rome fashion designer. He had always associated the Gucci name with the Florentine leather goods house. What was a Gucci doing with an office in Milan? "For me, he was a corpse, just like any other," Togliatti later said. Togliatti gently pulled a cluster of blood-spattered newspaper clippings out of Maurizio's limp hand and removed his watch, a Tiffany, still ticking. As he carefully went through Maurizio's pockets, Milan prosecutor Carlo Nocerino arrived. The scene was near pandemonium. Cameramen and journalists jostled paramedics and law enforcement officials from both the Carabinieri and Polizia. Italy has 3 law enforcement corps, the Carabinieri, the Polizia, and the Guardia di Finanza, or fiscal police. Concerned that key evidence might be destroyed in the uproar, Nocerino asked which corps had gotten there first. One of the basic, unwritten rules among Italy's law enforcement agencies is that the first to arrive at the scene of the crime handles the case. Upon learning that the Carabinieri had arrived first, Nocerino quickly dispatched the Polizia and ordered. Chapter 2. The Gucci Dynasty. The Gucci Dynasty. Bright red blood spatters formed Jackson Pollock-like patterns on the doors and the white walls on either side of the entryway where Maurizio lay. A scattering of shell casings had fallen on the floor. The proprietor of a kiosk across the street in the Giardini Pubblici had heard Onorato cry out and quickly called the carabinieri. "That is Dottor Gucci," said Onorato to the officers, using his right arm to gesture up the steps to Maurizio's motionless body while his left arm hung limply. "Is he dead?" One of the carabinieri knelt by Maurizio's body and pressed his fingers to Maurizio's neck, nodding when he found no pulse. Maurizio's lawyer, Fabio Franchini, who had arrived a few minutes earlier for an appointment, huddled disconsolately on the cold floor next to Maurizio's body, and stayed there for the next 4 hours while law enforcement officials and paramedics worked around him. As ambulances and more police cars arrived, a small crowd of curious onlookers formed in front of the building. The paramedics attended quickly to Onorato, whisking him away in one of the ambulances just before the homicide squad of the Carabinieri arrived on the scene. Corporal Giancarlo Togliatti, a tall, lanky, blonde officer with 12 years' experience in the homicide division, began to examine Maurizio's body. In the past few years, Togliatti's main job had been investigating murders among warring clans of Albanian immigrants who had moved into Milan. This was his first case among the city's elite. It wasn't every day that a leading businessman was gunned down in cold blood in the center of town. "Who is the victim?" asked Togliatti as he bent down. "That's Maurizio Gucci," one of his colleagues told him. Togliatti looked up, smiling quizzically. "Right, and I'm Valentino," he said sardonically, naming the perpetually suntanned, dark-haired Rome fashion designer. He had always associated the Gucci name with the Florentine leather goods house. What was a Gucci doing with an office in Milan? "For me, he was a corpse, just like any other," Togliatti later said. Togliatti gently pulled a cluster of blood-spattered newspaper clippings out of Maurizio's limp hand and removed his watch, a Tiffany, still ticking. As he carefully went through Maurizio's pockets, Milan prosecutor Carlo Nocerino arrived. The scene was near pandemonium. Cameramen and journalists jostled paramedics and law enforcement officials from both the Carabinieri and Polizia. Italy has 3 law enforcement corps, the Carabinieri, the Polizia, and the Guardia di Finanza, or fiscal police. Concerned that key evidence might be destroyed in the uproar, Nocerino asked which corps had gotten there first. One of the basic unwritten rules among Italy's law enforcement agencies is that the first to arrive at the scene of the crime handles the case. Upon learning that the Carabinieri had arrived first, Nocerino quickly dispatched the Polizia and ordered the great doors of the foyer closed and the sidewalk around the front doors cordoned off to keep the growing crowd at bay. Then Nocerino walked up the steps to where Togliatti was examining the body of Maurizio Gucci. Nocerino and the investigators thought the shot to Maurizio's temple made the murder look like a mafia-style execution. The skin and hair around the wound had been burned, indicating close-range firing. "This is the work of a professional killer," said Nocerino, studying the wound, and then the floor where the investigating team had outlined 6 shell casings with chalk circles. "It is the classic colpo di grazia," agreed Togliatti's colleague, Captain Antonello Bucciol. Yet they were perplexed. Too many bullets had been fired, and 2 eyewitnesses, Onorato and a young woman who had nearly collided with the killer as he ran out the door, had been left alive. Hardly the work of a professional bent on administering a traditional coup de grace. It took Togliatti the next hour and a half to examine Maurizio, but it would take him the next 3 years to learn every detail of Maurizio's life. "Maurizio Gucci was essentially unknown to us," Togliatti said later. "We were going to have to take his life in our hands and open it like a book." To understand Maurizio Gucci and the family he came from, it's necessary to understand the Tuscan character. Different from the affable Emilians, the austere Lombardians, and the chaotic Romans, Tuscans tend to be individualistic and haughty. They feel they represent the wellspring of culture and art in Italy, and they are especially proud of their role in originating the modern Italian language, thanks in large part to Dante Alighieri. Some call them the French of Italy, arrogant, self-sufficient, and closed to outsiders. Italian novelist Curzio Malaparte wrote about them in Maledetti Toscani, or Damned Tuscans. In the Inferno, Dante describes Filippo Argenti as il fiorentino spirito bizzarro. The bizarre Florentine or Tuscan spirit can also be cutting and sarcastic, ready with the quick comment or joke, as seen in Roberto Benigni, the Oscar-winning director and lead actor of Life is Beautiful. When a writer from Town and Country asked Roberto Gucci, Maurizio's cousin, in 1977, if Gucci could have come from another part of Italy, Roberto looked at him in amazement. "You might as well ask me if Chianti could come from Lombardy," he roared. "It wouldn't be Chianti any more than Gucci would be Gucci," he bellowed, flinging his arms wide. "How could we not be Florentine if we are what we are?" The rich history of the centuries-old Florentine merchant class pulsed in the Gucci veins. In 1293, the Ordinances of Justice defined Florence as an independent republic. Until the Medicis took power, the city was governed by Arti, 21 merchant and artisan guilds. The names of these guilds remain today as street names: Via Calzaioli, shoemakers; Via Cartolai, stationers; Via Tessitori, weavers; Via Tintori, dyers, and many more. Gregorio Datti, a Renaissance silk merchant, once wrote, "A Florentine who is not a merchant, who has not traveled through the world, seeing the foreign nations and peoples, and then returned to Florence with some wealth, enjoys no esteem whatsoever." To the Florentine merchant, wealth was honorable and carried with it certain obligations, such as financing public buildings, living in a grand palazzo with gorgeous gardens, and sponsoring painters, sculptors, poets, and musicians. This love of beauty and pride in creating beauty has never died, despite war, plague, floods, and politics. From Giotto and Michelangelo to the craftsmen in their workshops today, the fruits and flowers of the arts, propagated by merchants, have flourished there. 9 out of 10 Florentines are merchants, and the 10th is a priest, joked Maurizio's uncle, Aldo Gucci. "Gucci is as Florentine as Johnny Walker is Scotch, and there's not much that anybody can teach a Florentine about merchandising or craftsmanship," he continued. "We Guccis have been merchants since around 1410. When you say Guccis, you are not thinking of Macy's." They were simple people with an incredible humanity, a former employee once said of the Guccis, but they all had that terrible Tuscan character. Maurizio's own story starts with his grandfather, Guccio Gucci, whose parents struggled with their failing straw hat-making business in Florence at the end of the 19th century. Guccio fled his home and his father's bankruptcy by signing on a freighter and working his way to England. There he found a job at London's famous Savoy Hotel. Varying accounts have said he worked as a dishwasher, a bellboy, a waiter, and even a maitre d', but the hotel has no records of his employment. He must have gaped in amazement at the guests' jewels and fine silks, and at the piles of luggage they brought with them. Trunks, suitcases, hat boxes, and more, all made of leather and embossed with crests and flourishing initials, overtook the lobby of the hotel, a mecca of high society in Victorian England. The guests were rich and famous, or wanted to rub shoulders with those who were. Lily Langtry, the mistress of the Prince of Wales, kept a suite for £50 a year where she entertained her guests. The great actor Sir Henry Irving often came to dine in the restaurant, while Sarah Bernhardt claimed that the Savoy had become a second home to her. Guccio's wages were low and the work hard, but he learned fast, and the experience would have a profound effect on his life. It didn't take him long to figure out that the people who came to the hotel brought with them possessions that showed their affluence and taste. The key to it all, he realized, lay in the piles of luggage that the bellboys spirited up and down the long carpeted hallways and in and out of the elevators, then called ascending rooms. The leather was something familiar. He knew it from the workshops of his Florentine youth. After he left the Savoy, according to his sons, Guccio found a job with Wagonlitz, the European sleeping car company, and toured Europe by train, serving and observing the wealthy travelers and their entourages of servants and luggage before returning to Florence 4 years later with his savings. Back at home, Guccio fell in love with Aida Calvelli, a dressmaker and daughter of a neighboring tailor. It didn't appear to bother him that she already had a 4-year-old son, Ugo, from a love affair with a man who had come down with terminal tuberculosis and was thus unable to marry her. On October 20th, 1902, slightly more than a year after Guccio came back to Italy, he married Aida and adopted Ugo as his own. He was 21, she was 24. She was already pregnant with their first daughter, Grimalda, who was born 3 months later. Aida eventually gave Guccio 4 more children, of whom one, Enzo, died in childhood. The others were also boys, Aldo in 1905, Vasco in 1907, and Rodolfo in 1912. Guccio's first job back in Florence was probably in an antiques shop, according to his son Rodolfo. Then Guccio moved to a leather firm, where he learned the basics of the trade before being promoted to manager. When World War I broke out, he was 33 years old with a large family. Nevertheless, he was called up as a transport driver. When the war ended, Guccio, now working for Franzi, a leather crafts company in Florence, learned how to select raw hides and studied curing and tanning as well as the art of working with different hides and grades of leather. He quickly became manager of the firm's branch in Rome, to which he went alone. Aida, at home with the children, refused to leave Florence. Guccio came home every weekend and longed to open his own business in Florence, catering to customers who understood finely made leather goods. One Sunday in 1921, during a stroll around Florence with Aida, he noticed a small shop for rent on a narrow side street, Via della Vigna Nuova, running between the elegant Via Tornabuoni and Piazza Goldoni on the banks of the River Arno. He and Aida started discussing the possibility of taking over the space. With Guccio's savings and, according to one account, a loan from an acquaintance, they founded the first Gucci company, Valigeria Guccio Gucci, which later became Azienda Individuale Guccio Gucci, a sole proprietorship in 1921. Close to Florence's most elegant street, Via Tornabuoni, the neighborhood was strategic for the kind of clientele Guccio hoped to attract. Between the 15th and 17th centuries, some of the city's richest noble families, Strozzi, Antinori, Sassetti, Bartolini Salimbeni, Catani, and Spiniferroni, had built fine palazzi along the Via Tornabuoni, where, starting in the 1800s, fancy restaurants and shops began opening up on the ground floors of their houses. The Café Giacosa, still there today, had been serving homemade pastries and drinks to its fashionable clientele since it opened at number 83R in 1815. Suppliers to Italy's royal family, Giacosa first created the Negroni cocktail, named after a patron, Conte Negroni. The Ristorante Donné, founded in 1827 across from where Gucci would later open, catered to Florence's aristocratic families and hosted the ladies' counterpart to the all-male Florence Jockey Club. Next door, a florist shop, Mercatelli, served Florence's aristocratic families. Other establishments still operating today include Rubelli, selling fine Venetian fabrics, the Profumeria Inglese, and Procacci, known for its mouth-watering truffle sandwiches. Wealthy European travelers stayed at the Albergo Londres et Suisse, which in turn wasn't far from the American travel agency Thomas Cook & Sons, located at the corner of Via del Parione. At first, Guccio bought high-quality leather products from Tuscan manufacturers, as well as from Germany and England, to sell to the tourists who flocked to Florence then, as they do today. Guccio selected sturdy, well-made bags and luggage at reasonable prices. If he didn't find things he liked, he commissioned special pieces. He aspired to elegance himself, and was always impeccably dressed in fine shirts and crisply pressed suits. He was a man of great taste, which we all inherited, recalled his son Aldo. His imprint was on every item he sold. Guccio opened a small workshop behind the store where he could make his own leather goods to supplement the imported products and also started an active repair business that quickly became profitable. He hired local craftsmen and built up a reputation for offering service in addition to reliable goods. Several years later, Guccio acquired a larger workshop across Michelangelo's Santa Trinita Bridge on the opposite bank of the Arno along the Avenue Lungarno Guicciardini. Guccio ordered his 60 craftsmen to work late into the night if necessary to fill the rising number of orders. The Oltrarno area south of the Arno had become home to many small workshops, which harnessed the river's water to power machinery that treated and wove wool, silks, and brocades. The wide avenues bordering the river and the smaller streets leading south in this working-class neighborhood rang with sounds of hammering and sawing wood, washing and beating wool, and cutting, stitching, and polishing leather. Antiques dealers, framers, and other craftsmen also settled here. Just across the river, the area around Piazza della Repubblica had become the commercial and financial heart of Florence, dating back to the Middle Ages when it was the headquarters of the powerful trade guilds that regulated the city's thriving craftsmanship. As Guccio's children grew, they began to work in the family business, with the exception of Ugo, who showed little interest. Aldo had the keenest sense of trade, while Vasco, nicknamed Il Succube, the underdog, took on responsibility for production, although he actually preferred hunting in the Tuscan countryside whenever he could. Grimalda, nicknamed La Pettegola, the gossip, worked behind the counter in the shop, alongside a young sales assistant Guccio had hired. Rodolfo was still too young to work in the shop. When he became older, he turned his nose up at the idea and followed his dream of working in films. Guccio ruled his children strictly and insisted they address him with the formal lei rather than the intimate tu. He demanded good behavior at mealtimes and used his napkin as a whip, flicking it at those who were out of line. When the family spent weekends at their country home outside Florence near San Casciano, On Sundays, Guccio hitched up the horse to their wooden two-wheeled cart, loaded in Ida and all the children, and trotted them all off across the fields to morning mass. He had a very strong personality and commanded respect and distance, said Roberto Gucci, one of his grandsons. Thrifty, he ordered the side of prosciutto sliced as thinly as possible in order to make it last. He impressed these values on his children. It became family legend that Aldo would top off the bottles of mineral water from the tap. Guccio had his pleasures too, and one of them was the hearty Tuscan food that Ida served up at the large family table. Perhaps because of the poverty he knew in his youth, Guccio let himself enjoy his later years, and both he and Ida grew stout on her savory home cooking. I will always remember him with his Havana cigar and the seemingly endless gold watch chain that girded his waist, said Roberto. Guccio tried not to distinguish between Ugo and his natural children, but the boy didn't seem to want to fall into the pattern set by his father and brothers and sisters. His large size and tough manner earned him the nickname Il Prepotente, the bully, from his brothers. When Ugo didn't show any interest in helping out in the family shop, Guccio found him a job with one of his wealthy customers, Baron Levi, a successful landowner. Baron Levi employed Ugo as assistant manager of one of his farms on the outskirts of Florence. The situation seemed ideal for the brawny young man. Soon, Ugo, who was already married, began boasting about how well he was doing. Guccio, still eager to pay off his early debt, asked Ugo for a loan. Ugo, in financial difficulty himself, due to an extravagant girlfriend he was secretly courting, was too embarrassed to confess that he didn't have the money, and instead promised his father he would give him a loan. In the meantime, Guccio arranged a bank advance with which he paid off his loan. After paying back the bank, he agreed to repay Ugo over time, with interest. What he didn't know was that Ugo, ashamed to admit to his father he wasn't as successful as he claimed, had stolen 70,000 lire, the equivalent of about $3.50, a significant amount of money at the time, from Baron Levi's cash box. He gave his father the 30,000 lire, about $1.50, he had asked for, and ran off with the rest for 3 weeks with his girlfriend, a dancer who performed in the chorus of a small local theater. Baron Levi reported to Guccio his strong suspicion that Ugo had stolen from him, crushing Guccio's joy at having paid off his partner at long last. He could hardly believe his son would resort to stealing, but a review of the facts left no doubt in his mind. He agreed to repay the Baron at the rate of 10,000 lire, about 50 cents, a month. Ugo distressed his parents in other ways as well. In 1919, a young Benito Mussolini had founded the Fasci di Combattimento, the precursor to his fascist party, and by 1922, after Mussolini had already been elected to parliament, the Partito Nazionale Fascista had attracted 320,000 members across Italy, including bureaucrats, industrialists, and journalists. Ugo joined up, perhaps in rebellion against Guccio, and became a local official. He then used his power to terrorize the Baron and others in the neighborhood where he had once worked, arriving at all hours with groups of drunken friends, demanding food and drink. Meanwhile, Guccio struggled to make his business successful. In 1924, after 2 years of business, some suppliers who had let Guccio have goods on credit to launch his business were demanding payment. In turn, some of his own clients had not paid what they owed. The young merchant did not have enough cash to pay his bills. One night, in a closed-door meeting with his family and closest staff, a tearful Guccio told the small assembly he was going to be forced to close his shop. "Unless a miracle happens, I can't stay open another day," Guccio said. The strong, robust Guccio looked like a man facing a death sentence, recalled Giovanni Vitali, Grimalda's fiancé. A local surveyor, he knew the family well, having gone to school with Ugo and later Aldo at the Roman Catholic College of Castelletti. Vitali, who worked in his father's construction business, had put aside some savings for his future with Grimalda. He offered to help Guccio out. Guccio humbly accepted the loan, gratefully thanking his son-in-law-to-be for saving the small enterprise. During the following months, he paid Giovanni back in full. As business improved, Guccio expanded the workshop and encouraged his craftsmen to produce original articles for the shop. He identified skilled artisans and built a qualified team of leather workers who were more artists than laborers. They produced fine bags of delicate kid skin and genuine chamois, telescope purses with gussets on the sides, and suitcases inspired by the Gladstone bags Guccio had seen in his Savoy days. Other products included car robe carriers, shoe boxes, and linen carriers. In those days, upper-class tourists traveled with their own bed linens. The business did so well that in 1923, Guccio opened another shop on Via del Parione, and during the next few years, expanded the shop on Via della Vigna Nuova. The shop changed its location several times in the history of the company, with the last at numbers 47-49, currently occupied by the Valentino and Armani boutiques. Aldo started working in the family business in 1925, at the age of 20, delivering packages with horse and cart to customers staying at the local hotels. He also did simple shop tasks, such as sweeping and tidying, eventually helping with sales and rearranging the merchandise displays. Aldo's knack for mixing work and pleasure was evident from the beginning. In addition to developing salesmanship skills, Aldo adeptly turned his contacts with pretty young female customers into exciting flirtations. An attractive young man with a lean figure, bright blue eyes, chiseled features, and a wide, warm smile, he quickly charmed the young women who stopped in the shop. Guccio appreciated the effect Aldo's captivating manners had on the business, and he closed his eyes to his son's amorous escapades until one of his most prestigious clients, the exiled Princess Irene of Greece, came to the shop one day and asked to speak with him privately. Guccio ushered her into his office. "Your son has been seeing my servant," she reproached him. "This must stop, or I shall be forced to send her home. I am responsible for her." Guccio was reluctant to tell Aldo which young women he could or couldn't escort, but he did not want to offend such an important client. He called his son into the office for an explanation. Aldo had first met Olwen Price, a bright-eyed, red-haired girl from the English countryside, at a reception at the British consulate in Florence. Olwen had also visited the shop during her rounds for her mistress. Daughter of a carpenter and trained as a dressmaker, she had been eager for the chance to go into service overseas as a lady's maid. She had entranced Aldo with her shy, modest manner, her musical English accent, and simple ways. He persuaded her to meet him privately, and quickly discovered that her quiet demeanor hid an adventurous spirit. They soon became lovers, disappearing into the Tuscan countryside for their amorous retreats. Aldo quickly realized that the relationship with Olwen was more than a passing flirtation. When Guccio and the princess confronted him, Aldo surprised them both, announcing that he and Olwen intended to marry. "From now on, Olwen is no longer your concern," Aldo declared gallantly to the princess. "She is mine, and I will take care of her." He didn't tell them that Olwen was already pregnant. Aldo brought Olwen home, placing her in the care of his older sister, Grimalda, while continuing to meet her for furtive excursions into the countryside. Aldo then followed her home to England to meet her family. They were married on August 22nd, 1927, in a little church in the English village of Oswestry, near Olwen's hometown of West Felton, near Shrewsbury. He was 22 years old, she 19. Their oldest son, Giorgio, whom Aldo always called Il Figlio dell'Amore, his love child, was born in 1928. Two other boys followed, Paolo in 1931 and Roberto in 1932. The marriage wasn't destined to be happy, however. Aldo's and Olwen's sweetheart escapades had thrilled them both, but settling down to family life in Florence was different. First, the couple had to live with Guccio and Ida, forcing Olwen to fit into Italian family life and submit to Guccio's strict, commanding style. They all crammed into the elder Gucci's apartment on Piazza Versailles, near the old stone San Ferdiano entrance to the once-walled city. After they moved into their own home on Via Giovanni Prati on the outskirts of Florence, tensions eased for a while. Olwen dedicated herself entirely to the three boys, while Aldo became more and more involved in the family business. She never learned Italian well, was painfully shy, and had a hard time making friends. As he began to expand his horizons through the business, she grew fiercely possessive and resentful. "Aldo loved life, but she put a damper on anything he wanted to do," recalled his older sister Grimalda. "She never let him take her out anywhere, always making the excuse of having to look after the children. It wasn't what he married her for at all." Rodolfo, the youngest son of Guccio and Ida, showed no interest in working in the family business, even after his brothers and sisters were already helping behind the counter at their father's shop on Via della Vigna Nuova. Rodolfo had other dreams. He wanted to act in films. "I wasn't born to be a shopkeeper," the young Rodolfo, whom his family called Fofo, protested to his father as the elder Gucci shook his head. "I want to work in the movies." Guccio couldn't understand where his youngest son had gotten such ideas, and he tried to discourage him. One day in 1929, when Rodolfo was 17, his father sent him to Rome to deliver a package to an important client. The Italian director, Mario Camerini, spotted him in the lobby of Rome's Hotel Plaza and invited the handsome young man to do a screen test. Shortly after, a telegram confirming the appointment arrived at the Gucci home in Florence. When Guccio read it, he blew up. "You are out of your mind," he thundered at his son. "The film world is full of nutty people. You might get lucky and have your 5 minutes of fame, but what happens when you are suddenly forgotten and never work again?" Guccio realized that Rodolfo was determined and allowed him to go to Rome to shoot the screen test, which was successful. At the time, the young Rodolfo still wore short pants, as was customary for boys in those days. He had to borrow a pair of long pants from his older brother Aldo for the occasion. Camerini liked Rodolfo and gave him a role in Rotai, one of the masterpieces of early Italian cinema, a dramatic story about two young lovers who decide to commit suicide in a cheap hotel along the railroad tracks. Rodolfo had a sensitive and expressive face, perfect for the stylized cinema of the time. After Rotai, he became best known for his comical roles, in which his contorted expressions and laughable antics reminded viewers of Charlie Chaplin. He used Maurizio D'Ancora as his screen name. None of Rodolfo's later films had quite the same success, although he did have a part in Finalmente Soli, alongside the young Italian actress Anna Magnani, with whom he is said to have had a love affair. During the shooting of one of his early films, Rodolfo noticed a bubbly blonde actress on the set who played a minor part. Vivacious and unconventionally free-spirited for her time, she was Alessandra Winkelhausen, known professionally as Sandra Ravel. Alessandra's German father was a chemical plant worker. Her mother was from the Ratti family, near Lugano, on the northern bank of Lake Lugano in the Italian-speaking region of Switzerland. Shortly after she had caught Rodolfo's eye, Alessandra played opposite him in Together in the Dark, an early talkie about an adventurous young starlet who enters the wrong hotel room by mistake and slips into bed next to Rodolfo, who in life, as in the movie, had fallen head over heels in love with her. Their filmed encounter between the sheets led to off-screen love. Alessandra and Rodolfo married in 1944 in a romantic ceremony in Venice. Rodolfo had the wedding filmed, complete with footage of the young couple skimming the waters of the lagoon in a gondola and toasting happily at the reception dinner. When their son was born on September 26, 1948, they named him Maurizio, in honor of Rodolfo's nom de cinéma. In 1935, when Rodolfo was still developing his film career with no thought of ever joining the family business, Mussolini invaded Ethiopia. While far from Italian shores, this event nonetheless greatly affected the Gucci business. The League of Nations imposed an international trade embargo on Italy. As 52 countries refused to sell their products to the nation, Guccio could no longer import the fine leathers and other materials he needed to make his exclusive bags and luggage. Terrified that his small venture would collapse, as had his father's straw hat business years earlier, according to some accounts, Guccio geared up the factory to make shoes for the Italian army in order to keep operating. Guccio also came up with alternatives, as did other Italian entrepreneurs, such as his neighbor, Salvatore Ferragamo, who created some of his most remarkable shoes during the darkest years of the embargo. Ferragamo didn't overlook any possibility, cunningly using cork, raffia, even cellophane from candy wrappers to make shoes. The Guccis sourced as much leather as they could from within Italy, and began using cuoio grasso from a local tannery in Santa Croce. Veal calves, specially reared in the lush Val di Chiana, were fed in their stalls to avoid abrasions on their hides. Their skins were then cured on the outside and treated with fishbone grease. The treatment made the skins soft, smooth, and supple. Scratches miraculously disappeared with the swipe of a finger. Cuoio grasso soon became a Gucci trademark. Guccio also introduced other materials, such as raffia, wicker, and wood into the products in order to reduce the leather content to a minimum. He made bags out of fabric with leather trim. He ordered a specially woven canapa, or hemp, from Naples. Using this fabric, the Guccis developed a line of sturdy, lightweight, and recognizable luggage that quickly became one of their most successful products. Guccio developed the firm's first signature print, a precursor to the famous double G print, with a series of small connecting diamonds printed in dark brown across the natural tan background. The print looked the same any way one turned the fabric. Guccio had also begun to make other items besides the bags and luggage that were the core of his business. He discovered that smaller leather accessories such as belts and wallets generated a nice income by bringing into his shop people who weren't looking for large items. In the same period, Aldo traveled around Italy and parts of Europe to test interest in the business. The positive response he met first in Rome, then in France, Switzerland, and England convinced him that having a shop only in Florence limited Gucci potential. If so many customers were coming to Gucci, why not take Gucci to them? He tried to persuade his father to open shops in other cities. Guccio would have none of it. What about the risk? Think of the enormous investment. Where are we going to get the money? Go to the bank and ask them if they will finance you. During their family battles, Guccio shot down Aldo's every idea, but behind his back he went to their bankers and told them that he backed Aldo's plan. Aldo finally got his way. On September 1st, 1938, just 12 months before the outbreak of World War II, Gucci opened its doors in Rome on the elegant Via Condotti at number 21, in a historical building called Palazzo Negri. At that time, the only other names on Via Condotti were the exclusive jeweler Bulgari and a maker of fine shirts, Enrico Cucci, whose clients included Winston Churchill, Charles de Gaulle, and the Italian royal family, the House of Savoy. Long before the days of La Dolce Vita, Aldo had identified Italy's capital city as one of the most popular playgrounds of the world's elite. While his father shook his head over the bills, Aldo insisted that no expense could be spared to make the Gucci shop a magnet for wealthy and cultivated tourists. The store occupied 2 floors and had double glass doors and ivory handles, carved in the shape of olives, stacked one on top of the other. The handles were copied from the doors of the shop in Via della Vigna Nuova, and were one of the first symbols of Gucci, recalled Aldo's third son, Roberto. Massive glass-covered mahogany cases displayed the Gucci products, handbags and accessories downstairs, gift items and luggage upstairs. Rich-looking wine-colored linoleum covered the ground floor, while carpeting of the same color ran up the stairs and along a corridor leading to the first-floor sales area. Aldo moved to Rome with Olwen and the children, renting an apartment on the 2nd and 3rd floors above the shop. Having initially taken the boys to her home in England, Olwen decided to bring them back to Italy when the war broke out. The Allies treated Rome as an open city and didn't bomb it at first. While Aldo managed to keep the shop open and profitable, the boys went to a school run by Irish nuns, and Olwen worked with a group of Irish priests, helping Allied prisoners escape. In the final weeks, however, Allied planes began bombing railway yards on the outskirts of the city. Aldo moved Olwen and the boys out into the country, but was forced to return to Rome when city administrators ordered shopkeepers to keep their doors open for business. During the war, the Gucci family scattered. Ugo, who had participated in the fascists' march on Rome in 1922, became a fascist administrator in Tuscany. Rodolfo signed up with the Armed Forces Entertainment Unit and moved with the troops, playing the comedy roles of his early silent films and talkies, while Vasco, after a short period of military service, had been allowed to return to the factory in Florence, where he oversaw shoe production for the war effort. At the end of the war, Olwen was given a special citation for her work. Loyal to her Italian family as well, when she learned that Ugo had been captured and was being held prisoner in Terni by the British Army, she used her connections first to plead for better treatment for her brother-in-law, and later for his release. She also went to Venice with Aldo to rescue Rodolfo, who had been stranded with the troops after Italy's capitulation. It took time for the country to rebuild. The factory along Lugarno Guicciardini had been cut off as departing Germans blew up the Florentine bridges, including Michelangelo's Santa Trinita. The family began to look for a new site to resume its production of leather goods. In the meantime, Guccio, terrified that Ugo's position within the fascist party would prompt the new democratic Italian government to sequester Ugo's shares in the company as a penalty for his wartime activities, sat down with his adopted son one day and offered him land and a significant sum of money in exchange for his shares. Ugo accepted and went his own way, founding a leather workshop in Bologna where he crafted fine leather bags and accessories for the ladies of that city, in addition to supplying his products to the family business. Although Rodolfo had thrived on the acting life, The film industry changed dramatically after the war. Early talkies had superseded silent films, and the new Italian realist directors, Rossellini, Visconti, and Fellini, weren't looking for the stylized actors of their predecessors. So the young Gucci soon realized that the big parts and good scripts weren't coming his way. With a wife and a young son to support, Rodolfo, at Alessandra's insistence, asked his father if he could come back to the family business. Aldo, an advocate of the family-run business from the beginning, urged his father to welcome Rodolfo back. As the business expanded, he and Guccio needed more help. Guccio initially put Rodolfo to work in the Via del Parione store. Rodolfo proved an instant success with the ladies, who were thrilled to discover such a gracious and handsome salesman in the Gucci shop. "But aren't you Maurizio d'Ancora? You look just like him," some of the boldest customers would ask him curiously. "No, madam, my name is Rodolfo Gucci," he would answer with a gallant bow and a delighted twinkle in his eye. For a year, Guccio observed his son and was pleased with his work. Dedicated, determined, and attentive to the problems of the business, Rodolfo proved his reliability. In 1951, Guccio invited the young couple to move to Milan to manage the new Gucci store on Via Monte Napoleone. Running between Via Alessandro Menzoni and Corso Matteotti in downtown Milan, Via Monte Napoleone was Milan's principal shopping avenue, lined with fine jewelers, tailors, and leather makers, among other establishments, putting it on a level with Via Tornabuoni in Florence or Via Condotti in Rome. The new shop also began to cater to Milan's literary and artistic crowd, which gathered just around the corner at the Trattoria Bagutta, a popular meeting place. Meanwhile, Aldo's gamble on opening in Rome was paying off. American and British troops who were there after the war bought up Gucci's handcrafted leather bags, belts, and wallets, which were just the kind of souvenirs they were looking for. Particularly successful were suitcases called suitors, covered with the Gucci canapa and fitted inside with hangers and used by American and British officers to transport their uniforms. At first, business in Florence lagged behind that of Rome, but later caught up as American tourists flooded to Italy to visit its historical and cultural monuments, as well as to spend their abundant dollars in its elegant shops. Soon, Gucci's problem was keeping up production and pace with demand. In 1953, Guccio opened another workshop in the Oltrarno district across the river. Housed in a historic building in Via delle Caldaie, this workshop continued to be an important site for Gucci production well into the 1970s. Via delle Caldaie, named for the huge vats used in the 13th and 14th centuries to dye wool, ran south from Piazza Santo Spirito. The Palazzo Guccio bought had originally been a shop selling felt and wool fabric until a merchant family named Biuzzi built a spacious palace, Casa Grande, on the site in the late 1500s. In 1642, the building was acquired by the Cardinal and then Archbishop of Florence, Francesco de' Nerli, whom Dante mentions in his Divine Comedy. During the next 2 centuries, the palace figured in various accounts of diplomacy. After 1800, several leading Florentine families owned the property until Guccio Gucci bought it in 1953. Old frescoes covered many of the rooms. The most elaborate crept up the walls and across the ceiling of the large first-floor rooms where Gucci's artisans cut and stitched the smooth cuoio grasso into graceful bags. Downstairs, under the arched ceilings of the ground-floor halls, other artisans made luggage. As demand grew, more young artisans were hired and apprenticed to Gucci's senior leatherworkers, all under the watchful eye of the capo operaio, or head artisan. Each team, consisting of a junior apprentice and seasoned expert, was assigned to a workbench, or banco, and each artisan was issued a pin bearing the Gucci seal and an identification number, the same number on the time card he punched mornings and evenings. By the time Gucci opened a modern factory on the outskirts of Florence in 1971, the number of workers had more than doubled to 130. The Tuscan leather workers saw Gucci as the ultimate employer, who offered cradle-to-grave security no matter what the ups and downs of the market. "It was like getting a government job," said Carlo Bacci, who started working in Via delle Caldaie as a young apprentice in 1960. "Once you got in at Gucci, you knew you were set for life," he explained in his warm, lilting Tuscan accent. "Other firms would send people home when work was scarce, but at Gucci you had security," Bacci said. "Gucci just kept producing. They knew they could always sell what they had." After working for more than 11 years at Via delle Caldaie, Bacci opened his own leatherworking company, as did other Gucci artisans, and still supplies Gucci today. "We reported to work every morning between 8 and 8:30, recalled Dante Ferrari, another longtime Gucci employee. "The coffee break was at 10, he recalled. "If the capo operaio saw you fumble for a panino under the bench, he would report you, not only because you were wasting time, but because your hands could get greasy and ruin the leather." The leather workers specialized in either preparing the hides or assembling the bags. In those days, preparing the hides also meant scraping down the insides of the precious skins, which often arrived with animal tissue still clinging to them. Other artisans cut out the pieces, and still others pressed down the edges with a special tool, making the seams thinner and easier to stitch together. An operation called scarnitura. The true artists, however, were the artisans who assembled the bags. Each artisan was responsible for completing an entire bag from start to finish, a task that sometimes involved putting together 100 different pieces and took an average of 10 hours. Each workman was responsible for what he did, and his number went into each bag. If there was some defect, they would go back to him. "It wasn't like an assembly line where someone did the pockets and someone else did the sleeves," explained Ferrari, who kept a collection of black, cardboard-bound notebooks in which he painstakingly sketched and numbered each handbag style as it was created in order to keep a record. "Aside from the sewing machines, all you needed was a table, a good pair of hands, and a good brain," said Ferrari. Most of the time, the designs for the bags came from the various members of the Gucci family, who also encouraged the artisans to develop new styles themselves, with family supervision and approval. The bamboo handle bag, which was simply called by its code number 0633, probably came into being this way. Although there is no longer a record of exactly when the bag was developed and by whom, fashion historian Aurora Fiorentini, who has helped create a Gucci archive, dates it around 1947. The introduction of bamboo came with the use of new materials under the pre-war trade embargo. Some think the first bamboo bag was initially developed by Aldo and the capo operaio of that time, with a leather handle, possibly based on a bag Aldo brought back from one of his trips to London. The distinctive shape of the bag was inspired by the side of a saddle, its rigid shape, more in the style of a small case, unlike the softer, less constructed bags Gucci had produced up to then, also distinguished it. The bamboo, shaped by hand over a hot flame, gave Gucci products a distinctive, sporty look. A few years later, in Roberto Rossellini's 1953 Viaggio in Italia, a young Ingrid Bergman carries a Gucci bamboo handlebag and Gucci umbrella. The Guccis established a friendly personal relationship with the artisans who worked for them and spent time in the workshop, calling the workers by name, jovially slapping the backs of the old master craftsmen, inquiring about their families. "We knew each worker by name, and we knew about their children, their problems, their joys," said Roberto Gucci. "If they needed help to buy a car or put a down payment on a house, they came to us. After all, we all ate from the same plate, though obviously some of us had bigger spoons than others," he added sheepishly. Vasco Gucci, who became responsible for the factory, jaunted around Florence on a small motor scooter called the Motom that was popular at the time. The workers in Via del Caldaie knew when he was coming as the buzz and sputter of his scooter bounced off the buildings closely facing each other in the narrow street. "Uffa, eccolo arrivato," we used to say, recalled Ferrari. "Vasco was like a psychologist. He could really sense if you were interested in what you were doing or not." The workers came to have a love-hate relationship with the Gucci family. Proud and highly critical of their own work, they would nonetheless outdo themselves in order to hear a hearty bravo from Guccio, Aldo, Vasco, or Rodolfo. In the spring of 1949, Aldo, ever on the lookout for new opportunities, had gone to one of the first industry trade fairs in London. He spotted a stand featuring pigskin hides and was struck by their beautiful ginger color. He commissioned several skins from the tanner, a Mr. Holden from Scotland, asking him if he could have some of the pieces dyed in various colors, including blue and green. The tanner said, "Well, my boy, we have never done these before, but if you won't, we'll try," Aldo later recalled. "He presented me with 6 skins in different shades, shaking his head and saying, 'It's up to you. We think they're awful.'" According to family accounts, Mr. Holden was also the source of the brindle pigskin that became a famous Gucci trademark. As the story goes, the first spotted pigskin was actually a mistake. Something went wrong in the tanning process, marking the pigskins with darker, slightly raised spots. "Wait a minute, it looks new," said Aldo, who ordered the skins made up into bags. Whether or not his decision was merely thrift, as some suggest, because Aldo was reluctant to throw the skins away, the decision created another signature look for the company that later proved a marvelous defense against counterfeits because it was difficult to reproduce. The pigskin became so crucial to the Gucci business that Aldo acquired the tannery outright in 1971. The post-war years marked Aldo's rise within the Gucci business and the emergence of the ingenious marketing that made the Gucci name known worldwide. Guccio, growing older, wanted to consolidate the business in Florence. Reluctant to put all they had achieved at risk with Aldo's far-reaching plans, he challenged his son's ideas. Puffing irritably on his Havana cigar, Guccio would reach theatrically into his left pants pocket. He kept his pocket watch in the right one and pull out an empty hand. "Do you have the money? If you have the money, you can do what you want," he would say. Nonetheless, Guccio privately acknowledged Aldo's flair for the business. The Rome store flourished. Hollywood stars frolicked in the capital city, as portrayed in La Dolce Vita. The stars gave Gucci a new cachet, attracting still other customers. Slowly, Guccio let Aldo have his way. While they still argued heatedly over Aldo's ideas about expansion, privately, Guccio backed him, again going to the banks to support his son's plans. Meanwhile, Aldo began to look abroad to New York, London, and Paris. Why, he reasoned, wait for their customers to come to them? Why not go to them? He didn't seem to worry about where the money for his schemes would come from. Despite Guccio's reservations, Aldo had faith his ideas would pay for themselves. With his innate sense of marketing, Aldo picked up on his father's dedication to quality and coined the motto, "Quality is remembered long after price is forgotten," which he had embossed in gold letters on pigskin plaques and displayed strategically around the stores. Aldo also promoted a Gucci concept, a harmony of styles and colors that would unify their products and identify the Gucci name. The world of stables and horses became a rich source of ideas for Gucci products. The double stitching used in saddle making, the green and red webbing from girth straps, and the hardware shaped like linked stirrups and horse bits became Gucci trademarks. Soon, Aldo's marketing genius began spinning the myth that the Guccis had been noble saddle makers to medieval courts, a fitting image for the elite clientele to which the Guccis were catering. Saddle tack and riding accessories displayed in the stores enriched the saddle-making legend, and some items were even sold. The myth lives on. Even today, members of the Gucci family and former employees still say that the Guccis were saddlers long ago. "I want the truth to come out," Grimalda told the journalist in 1987. "We were never saddle makers. The Guccis come from a family in the San Miniato district of Florence," she said. According to a history of Florentine families, The Guccis of San Miniato were active as early as 1224 as lawyers and notaries, although this story is likely to have been embellished later, according to historian Fiorentini. The family crest featured a blue wheel and a rose on a gold banner floating above vertical red, blue, and silver stripes. Roberto spent a fortune in heraldic research and worked the rose and the wheel, said to symbolize poetry and leadership, into the company logo. The original logo featured a bellboy carrying a suitcase in one hand and a soft traveling bag in the other. As Gucci gained success, a knight in armor replaced the humble porter. By the early 1950s, a Gucci bag or suitcase established its owners as someone with refined style and taste. Princess Elizabeth, soon to become the Queen of England, visited the Gucci shop in Florence, as did Eleanor Roosevelt, Elizabeth Taylor, Grace Kelly, and Jacqueline Bouffier, soon to marry John F. Kennedy. Many of Rodolfo's movie star connections from his acting days became customers, including Bette Davis, Katharine Hepburn, Sophia Loren, and Anna Magnani. In the years after World War II, Italy became a center for fine-quality luxury goods, handcrafted leather shoes, handbags, and fine gold jewelry, recalled retail veteran Joan Kaner, currently senior vice president and fashion director at Neiman Marcus. Gucci was one of the first status labels to come out of Europe. After so many years of not having things, people really wanted to show off. That's when I first became aware of the Gucci name. People felt with Gucci they were really getting quality for the money. At the same time, the first Italian apparel designers gained recognition. A young Florentine nobleman, Giovan Battisti Giorgini, who had opened a buying office for American department stores in 1923 and toward the end of the war managed an Allied Forces gift shop, organized a fashion show in his own home in February 1951. He timed the event to follow the Paris couture shows and invited leading fashion journalists and buyers from American department stores such as Bergdorf Goodman, B. Altman & Co., and I. Magnin. The journalists raved over the stylish yet wearable designs, and the buyers cabled home for more funds. Giorgini's showings evolved into Italy's first pret-a-porter fashion shows, where names such as Emilio Pucci, Capucci, Galizzini, Valentino, Lancetti, Mila Schoen, Crizia, and others debuted under the gleaming chandeliers of the Sala Bianca in Palazzo Pitti. Chapter 3. Gucci Goes American. As American interest in Italian design grew, Aldo resolved to take Gucci to America, and especially to New York. Americans were Gucci's best clients. They loved the quality and style of the handcrafted leather bags and accessories. Aldo pressed Guccio to let him open shop in New York, and Guccio's hand went into that left-hand pocket. "Risk your neck if you must, but don't expect me to pay for it," Guccio fumed. "Go to the bank if you must. See if they'll stick their necks out for you. You may be right. After all, I am an old man." He began to relent. "I'm old-fashioned enough to believe that the best vegetables come from your own garden." Aldo didn't need to hear any more. Guccio, in his way, had given him a green light. He flew to New York, a trip that in those days took nearly 20 hours with stops in Rome, Paris, Shannon, and Boston. Aldo met a lawyer, Frank Dugan, who said he could help him with his plan. He later returned to New York with his brothers Rodolfo and Vasco. When they got into the city, he animatedly walked them up and down Fifth Avenue, gesturing at the elegant shops in excitement. "How would you like to see the Gucci name in big letters along this chic avenue?" he asked them. They settled on a small shop at 7 East 58th Street, just off of Fifth Avenue, with 2 display windows on 58th Street. With Dugan's help, they incorporated the first Gucci company in America, Gucci Shops Incorporated, with initial capital of $6,000. The new Gucci company was also given the right to use the Gucci trademark in the U.S. market, the only time the trademark was ever granted outside Italy. All of Gucci's subsequent foreign operating companies were extended franchise agreements. Aldo sent a telegram to Guccio in Florence, informing him they had appointed him honorary president of the newly founded company. Guccio was furious. "Come home immediately, you crazy boys!" Guccio cabled back. He accused them of being foolish and irresponsible, reminded them he wasn't dead yet, and threatened to cut off their inheritance if they pursued such a reckless scheme. Aldo brushed off his father's misgivings and threats. He also managed to bring the old Guccio to New York to see the new store shortly before he died. Guccio became as enthusiastic as if the New York opening had been his own idea. He even told his friends it was his idea. "Oh, commendatore," his friends would say to him, using the title bestowed on him by a national order connected to Italy's former monarchy. "You are a man of great vision." He had lived to see that Aldo's ideas were not so crazy after all, recalled Grimalda. Guccio, by then in his 70s, had every reason to be satisfied. His business was plowing full speed ahead. The Gucci name had been received as well in faraway America as in Italy. His 3 sons were working actively and had produced grandchildren who would one day take on roles in the family company. When each new grandchild was born, as the family saying went, Guccio would say, "Let him smell a piece of leather, for it is the smell of his future." Guccio encouraged Giorgio, Roberto, and Paolo to work in the shop, wrapping and delivering parcels, as his own children had done, firmly believing that the only way to learn the business was from the ground up. At the time, Rodolfo's son Maurizio was still a young child living in Milan and hadn't yet been inducted into the Gucci family school. Just 15 days after Aldo inaugurated the New York store in 1953, Guccio dropped dead of a heart attack one November evening as he was preparing to go to the cinema with Ida. He was 72 years old. When she came upstairs to see what was taking him so long, she found him lying still on the bathroom floor. The doctor said his heart had just stopped like an old watch. His devoted wife followed him 2 years later, at age 77. Once a poor dishwasher, Guccio Gucci had become a millionaire, and his business had become famous on 2 continents. His sons were carrying on the empire he had created, and he had been spared the bitter family quarrels that would come to characterize the Gucci dynasty years later. But Guccio himself had set the precedent. He had often played his sons off against each other, believing that competition would stimulate them to perform better. He pitted one against the other, challenging them to show what kind of blood ran in their veins, recalled Paolo. Guccio also caused the first major family rift. He excluded his eldest child and only daughter, Grimalda, from any inheritance in the company, solely because she was a woman. Grimalda, who was 52 when he died, had served faithfully in his shop for many years, and her husband, Giovanni, had helped save the Gucci business from bankruptcy in 1924. The old Guccio handed down an unwritten credo to his sons. No woman could inherit control of the company. Grimalda didn't realize what had happened until her brothers refused to let her have an active role in business decisions. She discovered with dismay that they had inherited equal parts of the Gucci company. She received a farmhouse, some land, and a modest amount of cash. It was an archaic concept, admitted her nephew Roberto years later. I never saw the statute, but my father told me that no woman was permitted to be a partner in Gucci. After failing to reach an agreement with her brothers, Grimalda called in a lawyer to try and obtain her due. Her efforts were in vain. She said later she misunderstood a key question during the court hearing and inadvertently signed away her rights to the Gucci estate in exchange for a settlement, an experience that left her bitter for years. What I really wanted was a part in the development of the company I had seen grow from nothing, she said. Extremely fond of her brothers, she never imagined they would take advantage of her. She didn't get a stake in the company, but she did get other assets, Roberto said years later. Though there is no doubt the company subsequently appreciated in value and was worth much more. For his sons, Guccio's departure was a mixed blessing. Although they missed his firm guiding hand, for the first time they were free to follow their own objectives, and between them they divided up the business into 3 areas of influence that initially worked well for all of them. Aldo, finally free to pursue his dreams of expanding Gucci overseas, traveled constantly. Rodolfo oversaw the Milan store while Vasco ran the factory in Florence. Harmony also reigned because Rodolfo and Vasco let Aldo have his own way, rarely countering him unless they felt he strayed too far from the values and directives Guccio left behind. Aldo moved Olwen into a spacious villa he built on land next door to Villa Petacci, a grand residence where Mussolini's mistress, Carla Petacci, is said to have lived. Along Rome's Via della Camiluccia, an idyllic road bordered with greenery that wound up into one of the hills outside Rome and is today home to some of the city's most exclusive residences. Aldo spent little time there as he traveled between Europe and the United States, opening new frontiers to some of the city's most exclusive residences. Aldo spent little time there as he traveled between Europe and the United States, opening new frontiers for the Gucci name. Although he and Olwen didn't divorce until much later, their relationship had long since faded. And Aldo picked a dark-haired shopgirl he had hired for the Via Condotti store to come to New York as his assistant. Her name was Bruna Palombo, and she resembled the sultry Italian film actress Gina Lollobrigida. She became Aldo's companion and eventually moved into the small apartment he took at 25 West 54th Street, across from the Museum of Modern Art. They lived together discreetly at first. Aldo worshipped Bruna, showered her with expensive gifts, and tried to share with her his excitement over the steady expansion of the Gucci business. He pleaded with her to travel with him, but she hesitated, in part due to her discomfort over her status as his mistress. He finally married Bruna in the United States many years later, even though Olwen had never consented to a divorce. After that, Bruna sometimes agreed to accompany Aldo to parties and openings, where he introduced her as Mrs. Gucci. Rodolfo, meanwhile, designed Gucci's most expensive handbags and hardware, in addition to running the Milan store. Rodolfo had very refined taste, recalled Francesco Guitardi, who worked for Gucci for 18 years and managed the Milan store under Rodolfo from 1967 to 1973. He was the one who designed the 18-karat gold clasps for the crocodile bags. He loved those things and spent hours on them. The most romantic of the 3 brothers, Rodolfo dressed like the actor he once was. He wore plush velvet jackets in unusual colors such as forest green and gold with shining silk pocket scarves, and in summer wore elegant beige linen suits and jaunty straw hats. At this time, Vasco had begun to produce his own designs in the Florence factory, where he also supervised Aldo's son, Paolo, who started working in the factory in 1952. Vasco's main passions in his free time were still hunting, his extensive shotgun collection, and his Lamborghini, pastimes that earned him a new nickname, the Dreamer. Of Guccio's 3 sons, Aldo became the driving force behind the business, making most of the important decisions, though he always sought consensus from his brothers. Aldo always wanted to do things with the agreement of the entire family, recalled Guitardi. He may have brought the ideas, but the decisions were always taken by the family board. That said, they usually let him have his way because he always had the right instincts, especially about where to open stores, Guitardi said. Aldo flew between the United States and Europe, where in 1959 he moved the Rome store to Via Condotti 8, its current location across from the historic Café Greco and down just a few paces from the Spanish Steps. In 1960, he secured Gucci's first direct Fifth Avenue exposure with a new store in the St. Regis Hotel on the corner of 55th Street. The following year, Gucci opened its doors in the Italian spa town of Montecatini, on London's Old Bond Street, and in Palm Beach's Royal Poinciana Plaza. Gucci's first Paris shop, on Rue du Faubourg Saint-Honoré, near Place Vendôme, also opened in 1963. A second Paris shop opened on Rue du Faubourg Saint-Honoré at Rue Royale in 1972. Aldo pushed himself constantly and hardly took more than 3 or 4 days of vacation a year. He made at least a dozen transatlantic trips a year, kept apartments in London and New York, and later bought an oceanfront estate in Palm Beach, the only place he used to say he really relaxed. When a friend asked him if he had hobbies, he just laughed. Even if he were visiting Palm Beach on a Sunday, he would find an excuse to go into the store and look over some papers or check the merchandise. Every 2 or 3 weeks, he met Rodolfo and Vasco in Florence to discuss business. No longer having a residence in Florence, he stayed at the Hotel de la Ville on Via Tornabuoni, which had opened in the early 1950s to rival the city's older fine hotels, the Excelsior and the Grand. As his father had before him, Aldo encouraged his sons to join the business. Thanks to Olwen, the boys all spoke fluent English. They even called Aldo Daddy. Aldo brought his youngest son, Roberto, to New York to help him open the 58th Street store, and Roberto stayed for nearly 10 years, until 1962, when he returned to Florence to establish new administrative offices and showrooms back at the family headquarters. Roberto also opened the firm's first franchise in Brussels in the late 1960s, a successful venture that would later be used as a model on which to develop Gucci's franchise business in the United States. In Florence, he also established a complaints office to handle any problems customers had with Gucci's goods or service. Aldo relied more and more on Roberto, whom he nicknamed Sonny. In 1956, Roberto had married Drusilla Caffarelli, the fair, blue-eyed daughter of a noble Roman family and a refined and pious woman. They had 6 children: Cosimo, 1956, Filippo, 1957, Uberto, 1960, Maria Olimpia, 1963, Domitilla, 1964, and Francesco, 1967. Of Aldo's sons, Roberto was the most conservative and respectful of his parents, obedient and docile. Paolo later nicknamed him Il Prete, or the priest, because of his formal ways and religious beliefs. Even Aldo at times found Sonny's style a little somber. During the summer months, Roberto and Drusilla and their children lived in Villa Bagazzano, a family home of Drusilla's in the countryside outside Florence. Winters, they moved back to their apartment in the city. When we would invite Aldo over to lunch or dinner at our country house, Roberto recalled, he would look up at all the portraits of the Virgin Mary in our dining room and say to me, "My God, Roberto, I feel like I'm in a cemetery." Giorgio joined Roberto in New York for a brief stint, bringing with him his first wife, Orietta Mariotti, the mother of his 2 sons, Alessandro, born in 1953, and Guccio, born in 1955. Orietta cooked up big spaghetti dinners in the Gucci's small rented apartment and fed the entire clan at dinner time in classic Italian family style. But the hectic pace of life in New York and having to live in his father's shadow grated on Giorgio. He soon returned to Italy, took over the management of the Rome store, and looked after his mother, whom he would ferry to the nearby Porto Santo Stefano for sea holidays. Giorgio was very timid, recalled Chantal Skibinska, whom Aldo hired in 1974 as Director of European Public Relations and International Fashion Coordinator. He was crushed by the enormous personality of his father. Aldo, like Guccio, was a tough and domineering father. Once, when Paolo was 14 or 15 and did something wrong, Aldo gave away his dog as punishment. Paolo, devastated when he discovered the dog missing, cried for a week. "My father was much tougher on his own sons than on his staff," agreed Roberto. Giorgio, surprisingly, was the first son to break out of the family mold in adulthood. Despite his shyness, Giorgio had a spirit of his own, and he infuriated both his father and his uncle Rodolfo in 1969 when he decided to open his own shop, Gucci Boutique, along with Maria Pia, a former Gucci saleswoman who would become his second wife. Located on Rome's Via Borgogna, parallel to Via Condotti, and 1 street to the south, Giorgio's boutique had a slightly different concept from the other Gucci stores. He catered to a younger clientele, stocking the shop with lower-priced accessories and gift items. He and Maria Pia developed their own line of bags and accessories, which were produced in the Gucci factory. Giorgio's rebellion initially amounted to treason, although it paled compared to later family discord. When asked by a journalist about Giorgio in the second Rome shop, Aldo replied, "He is the black sheep in the family. He has left the cruise liner for a rowboat, but he will be back." Aldo was right. In 1972, Gucci Boutique was reabsorbed by the family, although Giorgio and Maria Pia continued to manage it. After helping customers in the Rome store as a young boy, Aldo's youngest son, Paolo, established himself in Florence. Considered by many the most creative of the 3, he began working for his uncle Vasco in the factory, where he discovered he had a design talent. He put his ideas into production and soon brought out an entire line of Gucci products. Knowing how difficult it was to be around his dynamic and authoritarian father, Paolo initially resisted going to New York, happy to work on his own designs back home in Florence. In 1952, he married a local girl, Yvonne Moschetto, and they had 2 daughters, Elisabetta in 1952 and Patrizia in 1954. Paolo lacked the deference and diplomacy of his older brothers and bitterly resented his father's tyrannical attitude. His experiences working in the Rome shop as a boy had humiliated him. Only begrudgingly did he offer gracious treatment to customers, who were often VIPs and celebrities. He grew a mustache in defiance of Guccio's rule. His grandfather hated to see hair on men's faces. Paolo flourished as long as he was given free rein to design and develop new products, and he created the firm's first ready-to-wear items. In his free time, he raised carrier pigeons and housed some 200 of them in an aviary he built near his home in Florence, later introducing dove and falcon motifs into the scarves he designed. Aldo saw early on, however, that it wasn't going to be easy to make Paolo toe the family line. Aldo always used to say that Paolo, who loved horses himself, was a purebred, but that unfortunately he would never allow himself to be ridden, said longtime Gucci employee Francesco Guitardi. Aldo's drive, energy, and ideas seemed limitless. While in New York, if he wasn't jetting off to open a new store or give an interview, he rose between 6:30 and 7 a.m. and breakfasted in the 54th Street apartment with Bruna, who watched his diet, did his laundry, and generally took care of him. After breakfast, Aldo's first stop in New York, or whatever city he was in, was the Gucci store, where he greeted all the personnel by name. Never say, "May I help you," to a customer, he instructed the sales staff. Please always, "Good morning, madam," or "Good morning, sir." He then checked the merchandise and the displays before taking phone calls in his office from the other continent. Once, while visiting a store franchised to carry Gucci products, he ran his finger along a shelf and discovered it full of dust. He cancelled the franchise contract instantly. Aldo's mind worked double time thinking of new products, new store locations, and new merchandising strategies. He paced up and down in his office by day and in his bedroom by night, stopping only to make notes on what he needed to do. He was a kind of one-man market research firm, recalled a former employee. He always burst in the store with that globe-trotter's walk of his, recalled Chantal Skibinska. He scaled the stairs of the Rome store 2 and 3 steps at a time, staff members fluttering around him. Aldo inspired loyalty in his employees through his own dedication and conviction that they were all working for something they admired and should be proud of. By treating his staff as extended family, he got their undying commitment and loyalty, a management model common in Italian family-run enterprises. He stimulated the people who worked for him. He promised them a lot individually, recalled one former employee. That made them work very hard. Some ended up disillusioned when they realized that even after a lifetime of hard work, they could never really become part of the family, and, in those days, stock option plans weren't part of the program. Mercurial and intense, Aldo could be alternately a warm, paternal caretaker or a tough, domineering tyrant. I was 21 years old when I went to work for Aldo, recalled Enrica Pirri, of her early days in the Via Condotti store. For me, he was like a father or an older brother, she said, recalling that she went to him for help when she needed it, including asking for a loan for a down payment on her first apartment, which he granted. He was also very hard on me, she said. When I made a mistake, he would yell at me and make me cry. But he always had time for us. He was somebody you could joke with. He loved to laugh, she recalled. Playful and mischievous as a child, Aldo charmed troublesome customers to their faces and made fun of them behind their backs, a practice that embarrassed his clerks as they tried to keep straight faces and ultimately set the tone for shabby treatment of Gucci customers that would later make news headlines. Once, at a formal dinner in London, an Englishwoman asked Aldo innocently why there were so many Guccis, and he responded delightedly, "Because in Italy we start making love very early," relishing the shocked expression on her face. Aldo loved women and had many lovers. According to company lore, he even set one of his mistresses up in a luxurious apartment on the outskirts of Rome, where he installed his own private entrance directly from the hallway into her bedroom, where he could pass unnoticed by her servants or her children. He flirted shamelessly and greeted fashion editors he liked with a full kiss on the lips. He knew how to be gallant, never forgetting that women were Gucci's best customers. He was a scoundrel, recalled Enrica Pirri with a smile. He knew perfectly well that every kiss on the hand of a wealthy lady of Palm Beach meant the sale of another handbag. Aldo also had a knack for embellishing the truth to suit the message he wanted to give, and was probably himself one of the most active architects of the stories about Gucci's noble, saddle-making past. Domenico De Sole, Gucci's CEO today, who got to know Aldo very well when he was a young lawyer representing first the family and then the company, recalled that Aldo would nonchalantly make statements that flew in the face of logic and all objective proof of the contrary. He was the kind of guy who could come in out of the rain and look you in the eye and tell you it was a gorgeous sunny day outside, said De Sole. If irritated, Aldo paced up and down even faster than usual, arms crossed over his chest, snorting to himself and rubbing his chin obsessively with the fingers of one hand. Ahem, ahem, ahem! When he finally exploded, his face turned reddish-purple, the veins on his neck swelled, his eyes bulged, and he banged his fists on the table or desk, breaking whatever he happened to have in his hands at the time. Once he inadvertently smashed his own eyeglasses. When he saw they were broken, he slammed them hard again and again and again on the table. "You don't know Aldo Gucci," he would roar. "When I decide something, I get my way." Former employees have even seen irons and typewriters fly across rooms during Aldo's rages. Aldo retained some of the thrift he had learned from his father, Guccio. In New York, he loved to lunch, either alone or with a staff member, at the employee cafeteria under the St. Regis that served a warm meal for $1.50. He also patronized the Prime Burger and Schraft's restaurant, where he ordered a club sandwich and a hot apple pie. Another favorite was the roast beef sandwich at Rubens, across 58th Street from the store. An expensive lunch at 21 or La Caravelle was a big event, and sometimes his penny pinching struck others as contradictory. He would skimp on the hors d'oeuvres for a press lunch and then spend a fortune on a transatlantic phone call to discuss the invitations, recalled Logan Bentley Lasona, an American writer based in Italy whom Aldo hired in 1968 to handle press relations. the first person Gucci took on in that capacity. Always impeccably dressed, Aldo cut an elegant figure in his distinctly Italian handmade suits and shirts. Winters, he wore fedora hats, cashmere coats, blue blazers, and gray flannel pants. Summers, he dressed in neatly tailored linen suits in light colors and white moccasins. Initially, he snubbed Gucci's own loafers in favor of more traditional Italian styles, usually handmade wingtips from London. In those days, moccasins would have been considered too feminine for men. By the mid-1970s, however, Aldo made it a point to complete his attire with a pair of gleaming horsebit loafers. He often wore a flower in his lapel, too. His suits were always just a little bit too tight. He was just a little bit too polished, recalled Lissona. Aldo loved to be called Dottore in Italy, or Dr. Aldo in the United States, and he took full advantage of an honorary bachelor's degree in economics he received from the San Marco College in Florence. In 1983, Aldo got his American title of doctor in the form of an honorary Doctor of Humane Letters degree from the Graduate School and University Center of the City University of New York. Aldo continued the drive to open new stores. He identified Beverly Hills' then sleepy Rodeo Drive as a choice location long before it became a chic shopping avenue, and in October 1968 inaugurated an elegant new store there with a star-studded fashion show and reception. Set back from the sidewalk on North Rodeo Drive, the Beverly Hills shop was designed for the stars. It had an open, plant-filled loggia where bored husbands could watch the California girls go by while waiting for their wives. The massive glass and bronze door opened into an elegant interior featuring an emerald green carpet and lighted by 8 Giotto-inspired chandeliers made from Murano glass and Florentine bronze. Rodolfo even hired a film crew to record the opening. The year before, in a long-standing dream come true, Gucci opened its doors on Florence's Via Tornabuoni. The most elegant and luxurious shop to date, the Via Tornabuoni store had elaborate street doors, pastel decor, deep pile carpeting, gleaming walnut showcases, and discreet mirrors. An elevator lined with leather and trimmed with the ubiquitous red and green webbing carried the family and staff between the 4 floors of selling and office space. The Guccis also had a bank of video cameras installed in Roberto's office, from which he could control every angle of the selling floor. I could see everywhere, Roberto recalled with a chuckle. But after 3 years, the unions made me take them out. They said it was an invasion of privacy of the workers. With the opening of Via Tornabuoni, Gucci also required the sales staff to wear uniforms: white shirt, black jacket, black tie, and black and gray striped pants for the men, 3-piece skirt suits for the women in burgundy for winter, and beige for summer. The saleswomen wore simple pumps, never Gucci moccasins. It wasn't considered appropriate in those days for the staff to wear the same items as were offered to customers. The Tornabuoni opening, initially set for December 1966, had been delayed by the famous flood of that November, when the swollen waters of the Arno overflowed its banks and flooded the city, damaging and destroying priceless works of art and historical archives, and filling local shops and offices with 5 and 6 feet of water. When the alarm spread the morning of November 4th, 1966, Grimalda's husband, Giovanni, and Roberto, Paolo, and Vasco were the only family members in Florence. Together, they carried hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of stock and merchandise to safety from the basement of the shop on Via della Vigna Nuova up to the 2nd floor. We weren't due to move into Via Tornabuoni for several weeks yet, and all the merchandise was still in Via della Vigna Nuova, Giovanni recalled. The carpeting under their feet began to bulge and bubble as they carried the last of the goods from the basement up to the 2nd floor. As they finished, they were wading in water up to their waists. The shop was a mess, but we had saved 90% of the stock, Paolo recalled. And we didn't have to go to the expense of redecorating because the new premises in Via Tornabuoni were due to open in a few months' time. All in all, we got off lightly. Fortunately, the factory in Via delle Caldaie was on higher ground and hardly suffered any damage at all. The floodwaters retreated, but the flood of orders continued to flow. The artisans in Via delle Caldaie worked overtime and still couldn't keep up. The Gucci family soon realized they needed to expand, and in 1967 the firm acquired a site in the Scandicci suburbs of Florence. Grimalda's husband, Giovanni, was commissioned to build a new factory for the growing Gucci empire. It was to be a modern, 150,000 square foot factory, complete with design, production, and storage facilities. Aldo also envisioned hotel and meeting facilities for the twice-yearly company meetings of employees from around the world. Yet these facilities were never built. In 1966, Rodolfo created another Gucci icon, the Flora scarf, with the help of Italian artist Vittorio Accornero. One day, Princess Grace of Monaco came into the Milan store, where Rodolfo hurried down from his office to greet her and show her around the shop. At the end of the tour, Rodolfo turned to the princess and said he wanted to give her a gift. She demurred, but when Rodolfo persisted, she said, "Well, if you insist, how about a scarf?" What Princess Grace didn't know was that Gucci had hardly developed any scarves, except for some small 70-centimeter, 28-inch, square scarves with stirrup or train or Indian motifs on them that Rodolfo didn't feel were appropriate for a princess. Caught off guard and trying to buy some time, Rodolfo asked her exactly what kind of scarf she had in mind. "Well, I don't know," she replied. "How about one with flowers on it?" Rodolfo didn't know what to do. His mind raced. "Princess," he said with a charming smile, "it just so happens we are developing just such a scarf right now. As soon as it is completed, I promise you will be the first to have it." With that, he gave her a bamboo-handled bag and bade her farewell. The instant she walked out of the store, Rodolfo called Vittorio Accornero, whom he had met during his acting days. "Vittorio, can you come to Milan immediately? Something fantastic has happened." Accornero arrived in Milan from nearby Cuneo. And Rodolfo described Princess Grace's visit. "Vittorio," Rodolfo said to his friend, "I need you to design a scarf that is an explosion of flowers. I don't want a linear design. I want an explosion. I want it so that every way one turns to look at this scarf, one sees flowers." Acornero agreed to try, and when he returned with the completed drawing, it was exactly what Rodolfo had envisioned, a magnificent cornucopia of flowers. He asked Fiorio, one of Italy's great silk printers in the Como district, just north of Milan, to print it in a large 90-centimeter, 36-inch square. Fiorio had developed a technique, similar to silk screening, with which he could print more than 40 separate colors without the hues bleeding. When the scarf was completed, Rodolfo hand-delivered it to the princess. Although neither the original design nor the scarf itself have since been located, the flora propelled the expansion of Gucci's silk division and was subsequently adapted for use on apparel, bags, accessories, and even jewelry. A smaller version called the mini flora became popular as well. The flora also opened the door to an entire range of lighter-weight apparel a few years later. Acornero began creating 2 or 3 new scarves each year for Gucci. By the mid-1960s, Gucci was known to a savvy elite who found its products high quality, tastefully elegant, and practical. However, the product that made Gucci a status symbol around the world had been an insignificant sideline up to then. A classic, low-heeled loafer with a metal snaffle bit across the instep. The men's shoe, a classic, low-heeled moccasin, was called Model 175. A classier women's version soon followed. Gucci hadn't made it yet, recalled Logan Bentley Lasona. It was known to the carriage trade, but not to the upper middle class. The shoe made the name take off, Bentley Lasona said. Thought to have first been created in the early 1950s at the suggestion of a factory worker who had relatives in the shoemaking business, the shoe was put into production and sold in Italy for the equivalent of about $14. When Gucci began selling the loafers in the New York store, stiletto heels were all the rage, and the shoes were regarded as bizarre and hardly sold at all. But stylish women soon caught on to the chic comfort of the affordable, low-heeled moccasin. The original Gucci women's moccasin, known within the company as Model 360, was made of soft, supple leather, trimmed with the snaffle bit, and had 2 raised seams on top that narrowed toward the toes and then widened. In 1968, the original model was modified slightly and named Model 350, the so-called status shoe that became widely copied. Slightly dressier, it featured a stacked leather heel with a narrow gold chain embedded in it, and a matching chain across the front vamp. It came in 7 leathers: calf, lizard, ostrich, pigskin, alligator, reversed calf, and patent. And the new range of colors, including an unusual pinky beige and a pale almond green. The International Herald Tribune hailed its debut with a long article and a large photo. "Gucci has a new moccasin, which in itself is almost worth a visit to Rome," wrote Hebe Dorsey, the paper's respected fashion critic. By 1969, Gucci was selling some 84,000 pairs a year in its 10 U.S. shops, 24,000 pairs a year in New York alone. At the time, Gucci was one of the few Italian labels with its own store in New York City, along with that of clothing designer Emilio Pucci, whose colorful graphic prints had become famous thanks to Giorgini and the Sala Bianca fashion shows. The jingle among fashionable New Yorkers was Gucci Pucci. Some observers were mystified by the boom of the Gucci moccasin, which continued well into the 70s and early 80s. Paul P. Woolard, then senior vice president of Revlon and an avid wearer of the shoes, was amazed at how Gucci made fashion out of what he considered an established trend. "It's only an Italian penny loafer," he said to the New York Times in 1978. Aldo always felt that the shoe had caught on when the wives of rich Italian industrialists wore it while traveling. Low-heeled, less than an inch, comfortable, and versatile, it looked chic either with skirts or slacks. Priced at $32, the Gucci loafer was one of the most affordable and visible status symbols one could buy. The status symbol has always been semi-secret, shared by women who really care about clothes and worn like a club insignia, wrote fashion columnist Eugenia Shepard at the time. A comfortable working shoe that looked fashionable at an affordable price, the loafer quickly became popular with secretaries and librarians. With that success came new problems. So many secretaries and shopgirls started coming in and buying the moccasins that the regular clientele was finding itself elbowed aside and not happy about it, recalled Lasona. Aldo, in another stroke of genius, made a deal with the St. Regis Hotel and took over its cigar store newsstand space, which he turned into a shoe boutique in the fall of 1968. This gave New York's working women plenty of room to try on shoes and left the main Fifth Avenue store freer to serve its traditional clientele. The loafer also found its way onto the feet of lawmakers and lobbyists in Washington, D.C., earning the halls of Congress the nickname Gucci Gulch. In 1985, the Gucci loafer was displayed at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York in an exhibit developed by Diana Vreeland. The loafer is still part of the museum's permanent collection. Men liked the idea of the status symbol too, so Gucci redesigned the loafer for them. The new Beverly Hills branch of Gucci hadn't even opened its doors when Frank Sinatra sent his secretary over to buy a pair of moccasins to add to his 40-pair Gucci collection. Gucci also created men's belts, jewelry, and driving slippers, and even produced a man's purse called a document carrying case. Red Skelton had a set of maroon crocodile suitcases, Peter Sellers a crocodile attaché case. Lawrence Harvey commissioned a bar briefcase, complete with insets to hold bottles, glasses, and an ice bucket. Sammy Davis Jr. bought 2 white leather sofas like the one in the Beverly Hills store. Other famous male Gucci customers included sportsman Jim Kimberly, Nelson Doubleday, Herbert Hoover III, Charles Revson, Senator Barry Goldwater, and film stars George Hamilton, Tony Curtis, Steve McQueen, James Garner, Gregory Peck, and Yul Brynner. As Gucci bags and shoes became consolidated status symbols, the company moved into ready-to-wear, starting a decades-long challenge. Paolo designed the first Gucci outfits, mostly leather or leather-trimmed items, in the mid-1960s. Gucci presented one of its first dresses at the 1968 opening of the Gucci Beverly Hills store. The long-sleeved A-line dress was made of a brilliant silk floral print with 31 different colors. 3 gold chains attached with tiny mother-of-pearl buttons accented the Cossack-style neck and front slit, and solid colors from the flower motif banded the collar, sleeves, and hems. Another style featured silver buttons shaped like horseshoes. The following year, Gucci came out with the first scarf dress, made out of 4 scarves with the signature floral and insect motifs. In the summer of 1969, Gucci debuted its GG monogrammed fabric, which was an evolution of the old diamond print canapa. In the new version, 2 Gs were placed facing each other, 6 to 9, and arranged in a diamond-shaped pattern. The new monogrammed fabric was used for a full line of luggage, trimmed with the by then famous pigskin, including a cosmetic case for women and a toilet case for men, similar to what was being done at the time by Louis Vuitton. Gucci presented the new luggage to an enthusiastic audience at a fashion workshop at the Smithsonian Institution, which had invited Aldo to Washington, D.C. to give him an award. As a gimmick to promote the luggage, Gucci sent male and female models dressed in pants and skirts made from the same printed fabric down the runway, carrying the monogrammed bags and suitcases. The show received a storm of applause. Gucci presented its first full-fledged apparel collection in July 1969, during the Rome Alta Moda Fashion Week. The new apparel was sporty and practical. Aldo wanted women to wear Gucci every day of the week, not just on special occasions. "Elegance is like manners," he used to say. "You can't be polite only on Wednesday or Thursday. If you are elegant, you should be every day of the week. If you are not, then it's another matter." The collection included a sporty blonde tweed pantsuit with tunic top banded in glove leather, a long leather dinner skirt with a narrow fox hem and fox suspenders, sporty short skirts and shifts, and a suede bra and skirt set that could be clipped together at the waist with clasps. The International Herald Tribune's fashion columnist, Eugenia Shepard, raved about the new clothes, praising in particular a black leather raincoat with raglan sleeves and a wide red and blue canvas belt that coordinated with one of Gucci's most popular handbags. She also highlighted the new enamel jewelry and watches with malachite and tiger eye faces. By the early 1970s, Gucci products ranged from the $5 keychain to an 18-karat gold chain link belt weighing nearly 2 pounds and worth several $1,000s. Over the next decade, the variety of Gucci products would grow at a dizzying pace. It was difficult for anyone to walk out of a Gucci store empty-handed because there was something for everyone at every price range, Roberto recalled. There was every product, except underwear, to dress a person from head to toe for every occasion, from staying at home to fishing, horseback riding, skiing, playing tennis, polo, even deep-sea diving, Roberto said. We had more than 2,000 different products. By the 1970s, Gucci had come to symbolize status on 2 continents. 10 fully owned stores had opened their doors in leading capitals around the world, while the first Gucci franchise was operating in Brussels under Roberto's watchful eye. Aldo had even been called the first Italian ambassador to the United States by President John F. Kennedy due to the popularity of Gucci's classic, chic styles. Chapter 4. Youthful Rebellion. "Be careful, Maurizio," Rodolfo growled. "I have received information about the girl. I do not like the sound of her at all. I am told she is vulgar and ambitious, a social climber who has nothing in mind but money. Maurizio, she is not the girl for you." Maurizio struggled to maintain his composure, shifting his weight from one foot to another, wanting to run out of the room. He hated confrontation, and most of all with his domineering father. "Papa," he said, "I can't leave her. I love her." "Love," snorted Rodolfo. "This isn't about love. This is about her wanting to get her hands on our money. But she won't. You must forget her. How about taking a nice trip to New York? You know how many women you'll meet there." Maurizio fought back tears of rage. "Ever since Mama died, you haven't thought of me at all," he exploded. "You've only cared about the business. You have never bothered to think about what mattered to me, what my feelings were. You just wanted me to be a robot who obeyed your orders. But this is it, Papa. I'm going to have Patrizia, whether you like it or not." Rodolfo watched his son, stupefied. Shy, docile, young Maurizio had never talked back to him before. He watched Maurizio spin around, leave the room, and run upstairs with a resolve he had never seen before. Maurizio had decided to pack his suitcase and leave. It was no use arguing with his father, but he wasn't going to give up Patrizia. He would cut ties with Rodolfo. "I will disinherit you," Rodolfo bellowed after Maurizio. "Do you hear me? You will not get a cent from me, and neither will she." Patrizia Reggiani had mesmerized Maurizio with her violet eyes and petite figure when they met the night of November 23rd, 1970. For him, it was love at first sight. For her, it was the beginning of her conquest of one of Milan's most prominent young bachelors, and one of Italy's most glamorous names. He was 22 years old, she 21. Maurizio knew most everybody at the debutante party for his friend, Vittoria Orlando. The Orlando family apartment was on Via dei Giardini, a prestigious tree-lined avenue in the heart of the city that was home to some of Milan's wealthiest entrepreneurs. Maurizio knew most of the other guests. sons and daughters of the city's leading families. During the summers, the same group met on the Ligurian beaches of Santa Margherita, about 3 hours west of Milan by car. There, they gathered at the Bagno del Covo, a popular bathhouse with a seaside restaurant and discotheque, where leading pop singers of the time, such as Patti Bravo, Milva, and Giovanni Battisti, performed. Maurizio didn't drink, didn't smoke, and hadn't yet developed his talent for engaging small talk. Tall and gangly, he hadn't dated seriously, aside from a few teenage crushes. Rodolfo had quickly discouraged any amorous escapades, admonishing Maurizio more than once to associate only with girls from good families. Maurizio had found the evening rather boring, until Patrizia came into the room wearing a bright red dress that showed off her curves. He couldn't take his eyes off of her. Maurizio, wearing an odd-looking tuxedo without lapels, stood talking absently with the son of a prominent businessman, glass in hand, watching as Patrizia laughed and chatted with her friends. Her violet eyes, dramatically made up with dark liner and heavy mascara, flashed his way from time to time, and then slid away as she pretended to be unaware that the young man with dark blonde hair hanging limply around his neck had been staring at her since she arrived. She knew exactly who he was. Vittoria had told Patrizia, who lived in the same building, all about Maurizio. Maurizio finally leaned over and whispered to his friend, "Who is that girl over there in the red dress who looks so much like Elizabeth Taylor?" The friend smiled. "Her name is Patrizia, and she's the daughter of Fernando Reggiani, who operates an important transport company in Milan," the friend replied, following Maurizio's gaze toward the red dress. He paused, then added meaningfully, "She's 21 years old, and I think she's available." Maurizio had never heard of Reggiani, and he wasn't used to making overtures to girls. They usually approached him. But he summoned up his courage and moved over to the other side of the room where Patrizia was talking with her friends. He found his opening at the drinks table by handing her a tall, thin glass of punch. "Why have I never seen you before?" Maurizio asked, brushing his fingers against hers as he handed her the cool glass. It was his way of asking her if she had a boyfriend. "I guess you just never noticed me," she retorted coyly, casting her dark lashes down and then back up as she fixed her violet eyes on his face. "Has anyone ever told you you look just like Elizabeth Taylor?" he asked her. She giggled, flattered by the comparison, though she had heard it before, and shot him a long glance. "I can assure you I am much better," she replied, provocatively pouting her coral red lips, which were outlined in a darker shade of red. Maurizio tingled from head to toe. Shocked and enchanted, he gazed at her wordlessly, dazzled and excited. Desperate for something to say, he asked her awkwardly, "What does your father do?" Flushing when he realized that he had stuttered slightly. "He's a truck driver," Patrizia answered with a giggle, then laughed outright at the puzzled expression on Maurizio's face. "But, I thought, isn't he a businessman?" Maurizio faltered. "You are silly," Patrizia laughed, elated. She knew she had captured not only his attention, but his fancy. "At the beginning I did not like him at all," recalled Patrizia. "I was engaged to somebody else. But when I broke it off with my fiancée, Vittoria revealed to me that Maurizio was deeply in love with me. So little by little, everything started. He is the man I loved most, despite what he became after all his mistakes," Patrizia said. Friends of hers at the time said Patrizia never made it a secret that she not only wanted to marry a rich man, but a man with a name. Patrizia had been seeing a very rich industrialist who was a friend of mine, but he didn't have enough of a name for her mother, so Patrizia dropped him, a friend said. Maurizio and Patrizia began double dating with another couple from the Santa Margherita crowd. Before long, Patrizia discovered that Maurizio wasn't as available as she had thought. Maurizio's mother, Alessandra, had died when he was 5 years old, and he had grown up under his father's doting, yet strict hand. Her health had started to decline just as she and Rodolfo were beginning to enjoy their new life in Milan, and friends close to the family said she developed a tumor in her uterus following Maurizio's cesarean birth. Gradually, the cancer spread through her body, ravaging her beautiful face and figure. After she was hospitalized, Rodolfo brought the young Maurizio to visit her regularly. Alessandra died on August 14, 1954. Published reports attributed the cause of death to pneumonia. She was only 44. On her deathbed, she pleaded with Rodolfo, then 42, to promise her that Maurizio would call no other woman mamma. Profoundly shaken, Rodolfo told his friends sadly that Alessandra had given him the most wonderful years of his life, and she had left him and Maurizio in what should have been still happier years. Even though their relationship hadn't always been smooth, he sanctified her. Despite Guccio and Ida's concern that the young Maurizio needed a mother figure, Rodolfo refused to remarry or seek other steady female companionship. Though from time to time he saw a few women, mostly former acquaintances from his acting days, he limited the relationships, afraid to take time away from Maurizio or make him jealous. Every time the young Maurizio caught him talking with a woman, Rodolfo would say, the little boy tugged nervously at his father's coat jacket. Tullia, a simple, robust young girl from the Florentine countryside, was already Maurizio's governess, and she stayed on after Alessandra's death to help Rodolfo raise his young son. Long after Maurizio had left home, Tullia remained to look after Rodolfo. Although Maurizio and Tullia grew close, she never became a second mother to him. Rodolfo would not have tolerated that. Maurizio lived with Rodolfo in a luminous 10th-floor apartment on Milan's Corso Monforte, a narrow street lined with imposing 18th-century palazzi and few shops. Rodolfo liked the apartment not only because it was an easy walk to the Gucci store, but because it also stood directly opposite the prefettura, or police headquarters. In the days of frequent kidnappings of prominent and wealthy Italian figures, Rodolfo felt assured that help was just across the street. The apartment wasn't large, having just enough room for Rodolfo, Maurizio, Tullia, and Franco Solari, Rodolfo's personal driver and assistant. It was tastefully, though not grandly, furnished, as Rodolfo wasn't prone to excess. Each morning, Rodolfo would dress in one of his rich-colored suits, join Maurizio, Tullia, and Franco for breakfast, and walk the few blocks to Gucci's Via Monte Napoleone store. In the evenings, he would return for dinner, insisting that Maurizio remain at the table until he had finished. If Maurizio's friends called while they were still at the dinner table, Tullia answered the phone. Il signorino, she would say, embarrassing and infuriating Maurizio, is eating dinner and can't come to the telephone. After dinner, Maurizio rushed to meet his friends, while Rodolfo retreated to the basement of their building, where he had set up a personal film studio. He loved to watch his old silent movies over and over again, reminiscing about the glamorous early days with Alessandra. Rodolfo still traveled frequently for business, which meant Maurizio grew up often feeling lonely and sad. The death of his mother had traumatized Maurizio. For years afterwards, he couldn't bring himself to say the word mamma. When he wanted to ask his father about his mother, he referred to her as quella persona, or that person. Rodolfo, working on an old moviola in his basement studio, began to piece together all the bits of film he could find to show Maurizio what his mother had been like. He assembled scenes from their old silent films, footage of their wedding in Venice, and family scenes showing Maurizio playing in the Florentine countryside with his mother. Bit by bit, he created a feature-length movie about the Gucci family called Il cinema nella mia vita, or Film in My Life. The movie became Rodolfo's life work, an all-consuming project that he revised and edited continuously over the years. One Sunday morning when Maurizio was 9 or 10 and attending a private grade school, Rodolfo invited Maurizio's entire class to the first screening of his film at the Ambasciatori Movie House, located under the Vittorio Emanuele pedestrian shopping arcade and just a short walk from their apartment. For the first time, Maurizio saw his mother as he had never known her, a glamorous young actress, a romantic young bride, and a happy young mother. His mother. After the screening, he and Rodolfo walked the few blocks back home. As soon as they were inside, Maurizio threw himself on the living room couch, sobbing, "Mamma, mamma, mamma," over and over again until he could cry no more. As Maurizio grew older, Rodolfo expected him to work in the store after school and on weekends in the Gucci family tradition. Rodolfo apprenticed him to Signore Braghetta, an institution in the Via Monte Napoleone shop, who taught Maurizio how to wrap masterful packages. Braghetta's packages were beautiful, recalled Francesco Guitardi, who managed the Milan store at the time. Even if you only bought a 20,000 lire keychain, you took it home in a package that made it seem like a jewel from Cartier, he said. Rodolfo's relationship with Maurizio was intense and exclusive, dominated by Rodolfo's possessiveness. Terrified that Maurizio could be kidnapped, Rodolfo ordered Franco to follow Maurizio in the car, even when he went for a bicycle ride. On weekends and holidays, father and son would retreat to the estate Rodolfo had bought up, piece by piece, in St. Moritz. Over the years, Rodolfo had invested his share of Gucci's steadily growing proceeds in buying up property on the hill of Suvretta, one of the most exclusive areas of St. Moritz, until he had assembled an idyllic estate measuring more than 200,000 square feet. Gianni Agnelli, chairman of the Fiat Automotive Group, Herbert von Karajan, and Shah Karim Aga Khan also had vacation homes there, and Agnelli was said to have made several overtures to purchase the choice property from the Gucci family. Rodolfo named the first chalet he built on Suvretta Chiesa Morezzan, or Maurizio's house, in the local Swiss dialect. Rodolfo personally selected and transported slabs of peach-tinged stones from a nearby valley for the outside walls, where he mounted the family crest high up under the eaves, along with a fleur-de-lis, the symbol of Florence. Chiesa Morezzan became Rodolfo and Maurizio's retreat until Rodolfo built the second house, Chiesa d'Ancora, a few years later. Located higher up on the hill with a view of the scenic Engadine Valley, Chiesa d'Ancora had wooden balconies and exposed wooden beams. Chiesa Morezzan was then used for servants' quarters while its living room became a giant screening room for Rodolfo's beloved films. Rodolfo kept his eye on a neighboring chalet, a charming wooden house with hand-painted flowers on the shutters in the old style and blue flowers in the front lawn. Built in 1929, L'Oiseau Bleu, as the chalet was called, was the home of the elderly woman who had sold him the St. Moritz property over the years. Rodolfo had cultivated the old woman over time, stopping in for tea and seemingly endless afternoon chats. He thought L'Oiseau Bleu might be the perfect place to live out his old age. Rodolfo tried to teach Maurizio the value of money by withholding it, and gave him limited pocket money. When Maurizio was old enough to drive, Rodolfo bought Maurizio a mustard yellow Giulia, a popular Alfa Romeo model, a sturdy high-end car with a powerful motor. For years in Italy, it was associated with the National Polizia, which commissioned it for their squad cars. It wasn't the Ferrari Maurizio yearned for. Rodolfo also kept a strict curfew for Maurizio, who was expected home well before midnight on school nights. Intimidated by his father's autocratic and slightly neurotic personality, Maurizio loathed asking him for anything. He found his truest friend and companion in a man 12 years his senior, Luigi Pirovano, the man whom Rodolfo hired in 1965 to drive him on business trips. Maurizio was just 17 years old. When he ran out of pocket money, Luigi advanced him the cash he needed. When he racked up parking fines, Luigi paid them. When he wanted to take a girl out on a date, Luigi gave him the car. and fixed it all with Rodolfo. As Maurizio progressed in his law studies at Milan's Catholic University, Rodolfo worried that his son was too trusting and gullible. One day, Rodolfo sat him down for a father-son talk. "You must never forget, Maurizio. You are a Gucci. You are different from the rest. There are a lot of women who would like to get their claws into you, and your fortune. Be careful, because there are women who make their careers out of trapping young men like you." Summers, while Maurizio's peers vacationed at Italian beach resorts, Rodolfo sent Maurizio to New York to work for his uncle Aldo, who was overseeing the expansion of Gucci America. Maurizio himself never gave Rodolfo cause for worry, until the party on Via dei Giardini. In the beginning, Maurizio couldn't bring himself to tell Rodolfo about Patrizia. He had dinner with his father every night as usual. Rodolfo, sensing Maurizio's impatience, inevitably slowed his pace, dragging out the meal as long as he could while Maurizio fidgeted in agony. The minute Rodolfo finished eating, Maurizio excused himself from the table and rushed off to meet Patrizia, his pocket-sized Venus, as one friend called her. "Where are you going?" Rodolfo would call out after him. "Out with friends," Maurizio would answer vaguely. Rodolfo would descend to his basement screening room to work on his masterpiece. While he watched the old black-and-white film clips over and over again, Maurizio raced to his Folletto Rosso, or Little Red Elf, as he had nicknamed Patrizia because of the red dress she had been wearing the night they met. She called him her Mao. They often ate dinner at Santa Lucia, the home-style trattoria in the center of town that continued to be Maurizio's favorite restaurant for years. He nibbled half-heartedly at his meal while Patrizia enjoyed the savory home-cooked pastas and risotti, wondering at his lack of appetite. She discovered only later that Maurizio was eating 2 dinners, the first at home with his father and the second out with her. Maurizio was swept away by Patrizia, who was only a few months younger, but seemed far more worldly and experienced than he. If he noticed that her dark, seductive looks were the result of hours at the hairdresser's and in front of the makeup mirror, he didn't care. Even when she was a young girl, Patrizia's style was artificial and overdone. Their friends used to ask themselves what Maurizio saw in her after she removed her false lashes, combed out her teased hair, and stepped down from her high heels. But Maurizio adored everything about her. He asked her to marry him on their second date. It took Rodolfo some time to recognize the change that had overcome Maurizio. One day he confronted his son with the telephone bill in hand. "Maurizio," he barked. "Si, papa?" Maurizio answered, startled from the next room. "Are you the one who has been making all these telephone calls?" Rodolfo asked, as Maurizio poked his head into his father's study. Maurizio turned red and didn't answer. "Maurizio, answer me! Just look at this telephone bill, it's outrageous!" "Papa," Maurizio sighed, knowing the moment had come. "I have a girlfriend," he said, walking into the room. "And I love her. I want to marry her." Patrizia was the daughter of Silvana Barbieri, a red-haired woman from a simple background who grew up helping out in her father's restaurant in Modena, a town in Emilia-Romagna, less than 2 hours south of Milan. Fernando Reggiani, the co-founder of a successful transport business headquartered in Milan, often stopped for lunch or dinner at the family restaurant when he passed through town. Also from Emilia-Romagna, he enjoyed both the hearty regional cooking with which he had grown up and watching the owner's pretty red-haired daughter as she moved about the tables and rang up checks at the cash register. Even though he was in his mid-50s and married, Reggiani couldn't stay away from Silvana, no more than 18 at the time. She thought he looked like Clark Gable. "He courted me assiduously," recalled Silvana, saying they started an affair that lasted years. She claims that Patrizia, born on December 2nd, 1948, was actually Reggiani's daughter, saying that he couldn't recognize her at the time because of his marriage. In talking about her own childhood, however, Patrizia always referred to Reggiani as her patrigno, or stepfather. Silvana married a local man named Martinelli to give her daughter a last name and followed her Clark Gable to Italy's business capital. "I have been the lover, concubine, and wife of one man, and one man only," insisted Silvana, who moved herself and Patrizia into a small apartment on Via Toselli in a semi-industrial neighborhood near the headquarters of Reggiani's trucking business. Over the years, Reggiani had made a comfortable fortune with Blort, as his company was called, named for the initials of 4 founding partners who had pooled their resources before the war to buy their first truck. Although the German army subsequently confiscated Blort's trucks, Reggiani built the business back up after the war, buying his partners out one at a time until he remained the sole proprietor. He became a respected member of Milan's business and religious community and a generous contributor to charities, earning him the title of Commendatore. Reggiani's wife died of cancer in February 1956, and by the end of that year, Silvana and Patrizia moved into Reggiani's comfortable home on Via dei Giardini. Some years later, Reggiani quietly married Silvana and adopted Patrizia. Silvana and Patrizia discovered they were not alone in Reggiani's house. In 1945, Reggiani had adopted the son of a relative who couldn't care for the boy. Enzo, then 13 years old, had a troubled and unruly personality and resented the newcomers. "Silvana will be your new teacher," Fernando told the boy. "How is she supposed to teach me anything?" Enzo protested to his father. "She is ignorant. She makes mistakes in grammar." Enzo didn't get along with Patrizia either. The 2 children fought constantly, and life in the Reggiani household became unbearable. Silvana, who had been brought up in the old school of strict rules and heavy punishments, tried unsuccessfully to control Enzo. She finally went to Reggiani. "He isn't bright, Fernando. He isn't doing well in school," Silvana told him, and he sent Enzo away to boarding school. Patrizia, thrilled with her new father and family life, captured Fernando's heart. He coddled her shamelessly. She called him Papino and adored him. When she turned 15, he gave her a white mink coat that she flaunted proudly in front of her classmates at the Collegio delle Fanciulle, an exclusive school for girls on the east side of Milan near the city's music conservatory. For her 18th birthday, she found the Lancia Fulvia Zagato sports car parked in front of their home, wrapped with a giant red ribbon. She teased him, scandalizing him with questions about his faith. "Papino, if Christ is supposed to be eternal, then why is it necessary to make wooden statues of him?" she would say as he growled a response. "Papino, at Easter time that wooden Christ you bend to kiss used to be a tree." She'd throw her arms around his neck while Reggiani sputtered and fumed. "Papino, I'll come to church with you on Sunday." While Reggiani coddled Patrizia, Silvana groomed her. Silvana had gotten them from Modena to Milan. It was up to Patrizia to take the next step, into the living rooms of the best families in town. Patrizia became the living image of Silvana's ambition. But the cars, furs, and other status symbols only turned up the gossip among Patrizia's schoolmates, who whispered loudly about her mother's simple origins and made fun of Patrizia's outrageous style. Patrizia cried at home with her mother at night. "What do they have that I don't have?" she asked miserably. Silvana reprimanded her, reminding her that they had left behind another life in the small apartment on Via Toselli. "You don't accomplish anything by crying," she said. "Life is a battle, and you must fight. The only thing that matters is substance. Don't listen to the evil voices. They don't know who you are." After Patrizia graduated from high school, she enrolled in a school for translators. She was smart and learned easily, but having fun was her main interest. Classmates recalled how she would shimmy into class at 8 a.m., slipping yet another of her ostentatious fur coats off her shoulders to reveal she was still wearing a skimpy, rhinestone-studded cocktail dress from the night before. "She went out every night," said Silvana, shaking her head. "She would come into the living room to say goodbye with her coat clasped tightly across her chest and say, 'Papa, I'm going out now.' Fernando would look at his watch and say, 'Okay, but at 12:15 I am locking the door. If you aren't inside by then, you can sleep on the stairs.' After she would leave, he would look at me and say, 'You two think I am an idiot, but I know why she had her coat wrapped across her chest like that. You shouldn't let our daughter go out dressed like that. It was always my fault.'" Although Patrizia hardly seemed to care about her lessons, she easily became fluent in English and French in addition to Italian, making her Papino Reggiani beam at her good grades. At the same time, she became known around Milan for her provocative ways. "I first met Patrizia at the wedding of a friend of mine," recalled a former acquaintance. "She was wearing a beautiful lavender voile dress, only she wasn't wearing anything underneath it. At the time, it was scandalous," the friend said. While Maurizio had received such a strict upbringing from his father, all the boys in our group knew what kind of girl she was. In fact, they used to tell me they knew very well, but Maurizio didn't want to hear about it. He completely fell for her. Rodolfo was taken aback by Maurizio's declaration of love for Patrizia. "At your age," thundered Rodolfo, "you are young, you are still in school, and you haven't even begun your training to work in the family firm." Rodolfo protested as Maurizio listened silently. Rodolfo wanted to groom Maurizio to take charge of Gucci one day. He could see that none of his brother Aldo's sons was up to the task, something he knew Aldo realized as well. "And just who is the lucky one?" Rodolfo asked his son apprehensively. Maurizio told him. The name didn't mean anything to Rodolfo, who hoped the whole matter would blow over and Maurizio would lose interest in the girl. Probably no woman was good enough for Maurizio in Rodolfo's eyes. For some time, Rodolfo had hoped Maurizio would marry a childhood friend, Marina Palma, who later married Stavros Niarchos, and whose parents had a house near Rodolfo's in St. Moritz. Marina and Maurizio had played together as children. "She was the one person who Rodolfo thought might have been good enough for Maurizio," recalled Liliana Colombo, who worked first for Rodolfo and later became Maurizio's loyal secretary. Rodolfo dreamed that Maurizio would marry Marina because she came from a good family. He knew her father. He wasn't sure about Patrizia. About 6 weeks into Maurizio and Patrizia's relationship, an episode forced tensions out into the open. Patrizia had invited Maurizio to join her for the weekend at Santa Margherita, where her father had a small 2-story villa with a flower-filled terrace overlooking the water. Furnished with elegantly carved Venetian pieces, the house was a meeting point for Patrizia and her friends. "That house was like a port city," recalled Silvana. "Nando would bring home the focaccia, and I would make trays full of little sandwiches, and within a few hours there would be nothing left." But that weekend, Patrizia didn't care how many people had flocked to the house. She only cared about the one who hadn't shown up. Patrizia called Maurizio's home to find out if something had happened, and was surprised when he answered the phone himself. "I told my father I wanted to come and he wouldn't let me," Maurizio told her sheepishly. Patrizia was furious and amazed at his diffidence. "You're a grown man. Do you have to ask permission for everything? We are supposed to be in love, yet it's a crime for you to come swimming with me? Why don't you just come down for the day?" On Sunday, Maurizio finally arrived, having promised his father he would be back that evening. But at dinner, Patrizia persuaded him to stay the night. When Rodolfo realized Maurizio wasn't coming home, he called. Silvana answered the phone only to hear Rodolfo storming on the other end of the line. He asked to speak to Patrizia's father. When Fernando Reggiani came to the phone, Maurizio's father roared, "I'm not happy about what is going on between my son and your daughter. She is distracting Maurizio from his studies." Reggiani tried to calm Rodolfo down, But Maurizio's father cut him off. Basta! Tell your daughter that she is not permitted to see Maurizio anymore. I know she is only after his money, but she will never have it. Never! Do you understand? Fernando Reggiani wasn't a man to take abuse lightly, and Rodolfo's attack offended him deeply. You are very rude. You should know that you are not the only one in this world to have money, Fernando shot back. My daughter is free to see whom she pleases. I trust her and her feelings, and if she wants to see Maurizio Gucci or anyone else, she is free to do so, he shouted, slamming down the receiver. Maurizio, overhearing the telephone call, was mortified. He and Patrizia went out dancing that night at the disco down on the beach, but he couldn't enjoy himself. The next morning he left at dawn and drove back to Milan. Maurizio apprehensively opened the solid wooden door to his father's study. Rodolfo, seated behind his massive antique wooden desk, glared at his son and delivered the warning that sent Maurizio marching out of the house. Less than an hour later, Maurizio set his large suitcase, which bore the trademark green and red Gucci stripe, down on the step in front of Via dei Giardini 3. He rang the bell to Patrizia's home. When she greeted him at the door, her eyes widened at the sight of the heavy suitcase and his sad blue eyes. I've lost everything, he cried. My father has gone crazy. He has disinherited me. He has offended both you and me. I can't even tell you the things he is saying. Patrizia hugged him silently, stroking the back of his head. Then she straightened her arms and smiled up at him, her arms still encircling his neck. We're like Romeo and Juliet. And their families, the Montagues and the Capulets, she said. She squeezed his hand to try to stop the trembling, then kissed him softly. What am I going to do now, Patrizia? He pleaded. I don't have a cent to my name, he said in a voice that was almost a whine. Patrizia's gaze grew serious. Come with me, she said, pulling him into the living room. My father will be home soon. He likes you. We should talk with him. Fernando received his daughter and the young Gucci in his study, a simply though elegantly furnished room with bookshelves, an antique wooden desk, 2 small armchairs, and a sofa. He liked Maurizio, despite his fury over Rodolfo's insult. Commendatore Reggiani, Maurizio said in a low voice, I have had a disagreement with my father that has forced me to leave my home and my family business. I am still in school and I don't have a job. I am in love with your daughter and I would like to marry her, although now I have nothing to offer her. Fernando listened carefully and questioned Maurizio further about the falling out with Rodolfo. He trusted what the boy was telling him, both about his fight with his father and his feelings for Patrizia. He pitied Maurizio. I will give you a job, and I will open my home to you, Fernando finally said, choosing his words carefully, on the condition that you finish your studies, and you and my daughter stay away from each other. I will not tolerate any funny business under my roof, and if there is, all deals are off, Fernando said, looking sternly at the boy. Maurizio nodded silently. As for getting married, that remains to be seen. First, because I am still smarting from the treatment your father gave me, and second, because I want to be sure you two are convinced. I will take Patrizia away on a long trip with me this summer, and when I return, if you are still in love, then we will think about it. In a move that would become a pattern throughout his adult life, Maurizio had closed down his relationship with Rodolfo, who criticized and circumscribed him, and found a new source of protection and strength in Patrizia and her family. To the Reggianis, Maurizio appeared so well-intentioned and vulnerable, they were glad to welcome him into their lives and save him from the irate and irrational Rodolfo. The sofa in the study became Maurizio's bed for the next few months while he went to work for Reggiani by day and finished his studies at night. The news that the two young lovers were living under the same roof traveled like wildfire through Milan's social circles. Patrizia's friends brimmed with questions about what it was like to live with her boyfriend. Patrizia played her role discreetly. Papa makes sure we hardly even pass each other in the hallway, she complained, delighted at the eagerness of her listeners. I never see Maurizio anymore. During the day he works with Papa's business, and at night he studies for his exams, she pouted. While Maurizio learned the ropes in the trucking business, Rodolfo brooded bitterly, unable to accept Maurizio's ready departure and willingness to give up all that awaited him just for a woman. Rodolfo's pride kept him from seeking a reconciliation. Missing the evening meals he had shared with Maurizio, Rodolfo stayed in the office later and later each night, instructing the cook to leave him only a cold meal he would eat by himself, usually just fruit and a plate of cheese. When his brothers Aldo and Vasco came to see him, concerned about the rupture between father and son, he cut them short. For me, that Bisquero, that fool of a son, doesn't exist anymore. Do you understand? He screamed. His father never refused me as Patrizia Reggiani, but as the woman who was taking away his beloved son? Patrizia said later. For the first time, Maurizio was defying his orders, and he was furious about it. In the meanwhile, Reggiani left with Patrizia on a trip around the world. When they returned in September 1971, Patrizia and Maurizio were more in love than ever. Fernando's managers reported that Maurizio had proven himself to be a serious worker with a good head on his shoulders. He didn't hold back, and even did hard physical labor such as unloading containers at the docking bay. He took to heart the problems of the company, carefully coordinating the schedules of the truck drivers. Several days after their return, Reggiani called his daughter into his study. Va bene, he said to her. Okay, you two have convinced me that you are serious. I will agree to your marriage with Maurizio. It is a shame that Rodolfo is so stubborn, for by acting this way he will lose a son, and I will gain one, Reggiani said. The wedding date was set for October 28, 1972, and under Silvana's watchful eye, wedding plans gathered speed. When Rodolfo realized Maurizio was not going to relinquish Patrizia, he decided to take drastic measures. One morning in late September 1972, he went to see the Cardinal of Milan, Giovanni Colombo, but not to seek spiritual solace. After a long wait in the somber, high-ceilinged hall outside the Cardinal's office, which was located in a building just behind Milan's cathedral, the Duomo, he made his appeal. "Your Eminence," he begged the Cardinal, "I need your help. The marriage between my son and Patrizia Reggiani must be stopped." "On what grounds?" Cardinal Colombo asked. "He is my only son. His mother is dead, and he is all I have," Rodolfo told him, trembling. "This Patrizia Reggiani is not the right woman for him, and I am afraid you are the only one who can stop them now." The Cardinal heard Rodolfo out. "I'm sorry," he said finally, standing up to signal the end of the audience. "If they are in love and want to marry, there is nothing I can do to prevent it," he said, ushering Rodolfo to the door. Rodolfo turned in on himself, brooding about his lost son. At the same time, Maurizio seemed reborn. He had received his law degree from Milan's Catholic University. In the months he lived with the Reggianis, he realized that the world didn't revolve around his father. He seemed more mature and felt more in control of himself and his future, even if it wasn't to be in his family firm. He was doing well and enjoying his work with Patrizia's father, of whom he had grown fond. The Reggianis grew fond of him, too. Maurizio even called Fernando Papa Baffo for his bristly grey mustache, though never to his face. "Maurizio even said openly that he enjoyed unloading the trucks," marveled one of his friends. "Those were the years of the student movements in Italy. In Milan, as in other cities, there were marches and gang wars and tear gas in the downtown streets. Maurizio wasn't involved in the student riots, but Patrizia was Maurizio's rebellion. He had found his independence," the friend said. Maurizio wasn't completely at peace with himself, however. Several days before his marriage to Patrizia, he went to confession in the Duomo, Milan's magnificent 14th-century cathedral. He walked into the lofty, shadowy nave and headed over to one of the confessionals along the side. He liked the feeling of anonymity, of being one among many, sensing murmuring voices, softly echoing footsteps, light filtering down hazily from high-stained glass windows. "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned," Maurizio muttered, kneeling on the low padded bench inside the confessional. He lowered his head toward his hands, which he held, fingers knitted together, in front of the faded burgundy curtain. "I have disobeyed one of the 10 Commandments," he said. "I have not honored my father's wishes. I am going to marry against his will." The 14th-century red brick basilica, Santa Maria della Pace, stands in a walled, tree-filled courtyard located directly behind the 20th-century Milan courthouse. As is the custom in Italy, for the wedding Silvana had the pews draped in burgundy velvet and decorated with bunches of wildflowers. Papino Reggiani splurged and hired an antique Rolls-Royce to deliver his daughter to the church, and 6 ushers in tails escorted the guests. A brief reception in the halls of the Order of San Sepolcro under the church followed the ceremony, and later the 500 guests sat down to dinner under the twinkling chandeliers at the Club dei Giardini, the same Milan social club where, with pulsing music and dramatic spotlights, Gucci would stage its modern fashion comeback 23 years later. Maurizio and Patrizia's wedding was one of the big social events of the year, but not one of Maurizio's relatives was there. Patrizia's family, aware that Rodolfo opposed the marriage, had not invited him. Early that morning, Rodolfo had summoned his driver, Luigi, and ordered him to drive them to Florence on a pretense. "It seemed the whole city was celebrating this wedding," Luigi recalled. "The only thing for Rodolfo to do was to leave town." While the church overflowed with Patrizia's friends and acquaintances, Maurizio's guests included only one of his professors and some of his school friends. His uncle Vasco sent a silver vase. Patrizia was convinced that Rodolfo would come around. "Don't worry, Mao," she consoled him. "Things will sort themselves out. Just wait until a grandchild or 2 comes along. Your father will make up with you." Patrizia was right, but she wasn't the type to leave things to chance. She lobbied Aldo, who had always been a strong advocate of the family nature of the business. He had been watching Maurizio and was impressed by his nephew's determination to stand up to his father. He was beginning to realize that none of his own boys had the desire to join him in the United States to work with him, nor the ambition to carry on his work. His son Roberto had settled in Florence with his wife Drusilla and their flock of children. Giorgio had established himself in Rome, where he oversaw the 2 boutiques, and Paolo was working for Vasco in Florence. In April 1971, Aldo hinted to the New York Times that he was looking for a successor because his own sons could not be spared from their functions within the business. He said he might train a young nephew, soon to graduate from college. "Perhaps before he meets some unattractive young girl and settles into family life," he added, "I will give him the challenge of becoming my replacement." It was a strong signal for Maurizio. Aldo went to speak with Rodolfo. "Rodolfo, you are more than 60 years old. Maurizio is your only son. He is your true fortune. Look, Patrizia isn't such a bad girl, and I am convinced she really does love him." He studied his brother, who had closed himself off with a rigid glare. Aldo realized he was going to have to get tough in his peacemaking effort. "Fofo," Aldo said sharply, "don't be a fool. If you don't bring Maurizio back into the fold, I am telling you, you will only be a bitter and lonely old man." 2 years had gone by since Maurizio had left home. That evening, when he came home for dinner to the cozy attic apartment Reggiani had given them on Via Durini in the center of Milan, Patrizia greeted him with a mysterious smile. "I have good news for you," she said. "Your father wants to see you tomorrow." Maurizio looked surprised and happy. "You have your Uncle Aldo to thank. And also me," she said, as she threw her arms around him. The next day, Maurizio walked the few blocks to his father's office over the Gucci store, worrying over what they would say to each other. He didn't have to. His father greeted him warmly at the door as if nothing had happened between them, in typical Gucci style. "Ciao, Maurizio," Rodolfo said with a smile. "Come stai? How are you?" Neither mentioned their disagreements nor the wedding. Rodolfo asked about Patrizia. "How would you and Patrizia like to live in New York?" Maurizio's eyes lit up. "Your Uncle Aldo would like you to come over and give him a hand." Maurizio was ecstatic. Less than a month later, the young couple moved to New York. Despite her enthusiasm about arriving in Manhattan, Patrizia was not thrilled with the third-rate hotel Rodolfo had arranged for them to stay in until they could find an apartment. "Your name is Gucci and we have to live like peasants?" she complained to Maurizio. The next day, she moved them into a suite at the St. Regis Hotel on the corner of 5th Avenue and 55th Street, a few paces from the Gucci store. From there, they moved to one of Aldo's rental apartments, where they lived for about a year until Patrizia spotted a luxury apartment in the Olympic Tower, the bronze-tinted glass skyscraper built by Aristotle Onassis. She loved the look of the elegant porter at the door, the floor-to-ceiling picture windows looking out over 5th Avenue. "Oh, Mao, I want to live here," she said, throwing her arms around him as he blushed in the presence of the real estate agent. "Are you crazy?" he protested. "How am I going to go to my father and say I'd like to buy a penthouse in Manhattan?" "Well, if you don't have the courage to do it, I will," she retorted. When Patrizia approached Rodolfo, he was furious. "You want to ruin me," he accused her. "If you think about it, it is an excellent investment," Patrizia retorted coolly. Rodolfo shook his head, but promised to think about it. 2 months later, Patrizia had her apartment, which measured some 1,600 square feet over 2 floors. She covered the walls with taupe faux suede fabric, furnished the rooms with modern pieces trimmed with smoked glass, and draped leopard and jaguar skins over the couches and on the floors. She drove happily around New York in a chauffeured car with vanity plates that read Maurizia, and generally enjoyed their New York life. She confessed once in a television interview that she would rather weep in a Rolls-Royce than be happy on a bicycle. Over the years, other gifts followed. A second apartment in Olympic Tower, hillside terrain in Acapulco on which she wanted to build, Cherry Blossom Farm in Connecticut, and a duplex penthouse in Milan. Rodolfo's generosity was entirely in line with custom in Italy, where Italian parents generally provided living quarters for their children when they marry. Until marriage, grown children usually live at home with their parents. The gift of housing may range from accommodation within the family home to a co-op apartment or sometimes even an independent house. Wealthy parents, of course, can provide vacation villas and even overseas properties in addition to a principal residence. Because of Rodolfo's rupture with Maurizio over Patrizia, the young couple had initially moved into an apartment that Peppino Reggiani had offered them in Milan. Patrizia fretted, feeling they had a right to more. After Rodolfo and Maurizio reconciled, the presentation of the Olympic Tower apartment and the other properties to the young couple represented Rodolfo's efforts to make amends, and Patrizia felt to thank her for all she was doing for Maurizio. "Rodolfo became more and more generous with me," Patrizia recalled. "Every present was his way of thanking me for the happiness I was creating around my husband. In particular, it was his silent appreciation for my diplomatic work with his brother Aldo." However, Patrizia did not receive title to the New York apartments, the Acapulco hillside, the Connecticut farm, or the penthouse in Milan. An offshore family holding company based in Liechtenstein called Katefeed AG, probably established as a tax shelter, held title to all of them. Putting family assets into holding companies was also an effective way to prevent the escape of family wealth. So if a daughter-in-law, for example, left the fold, she might have a very hard time establishing legal claim to any property given to her, but actually deeded to the holding company. Patrizia, in love with Maurizio and elated over Rodolfo's generosity, didn't pay much attention to ownership issues back then. She devoted herself to being a good wife and mother. Alessandra, their first daughter, born in 1976, was named for Maurizio's mother, a decision that made Rodolfo profoundly happy. Their second daughter, Allegra, followed in 1981. "We were like 2 peas in a pod," Patrizia said. "We were faithful to each other and gave each other serenity. He let me take all the initiative in the house, with our social life, with the girls. He smothered me with attention, loving gazes, gifts. He listened to me." In honor of Allegra's birth, Maurizio made the most ambitious purchase of all, a 64-meter, 208-foot, 3-masted yacht called the Creole that had once been owned by Greek tycoon Stavros Niarchos. Sailors said it was the most beautiful ship in the world, although when Maurizio and Patrizia first saw Creole, she was little more than a dilapidated, rotting hull. Maurizio had bought the boat for what was considered a bargain price, less than $1 million, from a Danish drug rehabilitation program that could no longer use it. He shipped the yacht from the Danish shipyard where he had first seen it to Italy's Ligurian port, La Spezia, for initial repairs. He planned to restore the Creole to its original beauty. Commissioned by Alexander Cochrane, a rich American carpet manufacturer from noted English shipbuilder Kemper and Nicholson in 1925, the yacht was originally called the Vira and was one of the largest schooners built in its time. But the history of the schooner was also linked with tragedy. Cochrane died prematurely of cancer, and his heirs sold the ship shortly thereafter. It then changed ownership and name several times. After the war, when the vessel was decommissioned by the British Navy, it returned to the commercial yacht market. Stavros Niarchos fell in love with it and bought it from a German businessman in 1953, rehabilitating it and renaming it the Creole. He replaced the small deckhouse with a spacious cabin in teak and mahogany, large enough to contain a master bedroom and a studio. He was loath to sleep below decks, terrified of drowning in his sleep. Whether or not one believes the sailor's adage that it's bad luck to change the name of a boat, and the Creole's name had been changed 3 times, tragedy came to Niarchos. His first wife, Eugenia, took an overdose of pills and committed suicide on the Creole in 1970. A few years later, his second wife, Tina, who was Eugenia's younger sister, also killed herself on the yacht. In his grief, Niarchos came to hate the ship and never set foot on it again. He finally sold it to the Danish Navy, which turned it over to the Drug Rehabilitation Institute. Maurizio bought the Creole in 1982. Though thrilled at the prospects of idyllic cruises once the Creole had been restored, Patrizia worried that the tragic deaths of Niarchos' wives had cast a negative aura over the boat. An attentive client of astrologers and psychics, Patrizia convinced Maurizio to go aboard with Frida, a psychic, to exorcise the evil spirits she was sure still haunted the sailing vessel. It had been taken out of the water for repairs, and was propped up in a hangar in a La Spezia shipyard like an old beached whale. As they stepped aboard, Frida asked everyone, including 2 crew members who were guiding their tour with flashlights, to stand back. She went into a trance and started walking slowly along the deck, into the central cabin, and down one of the halls, mumbling incomprehensible words. Patrizia and Maurizio and the 2 crew members followed at a distance. The 2 workmen exchanged skeptical glances with each other. "Open the door! Open the door!" Frida cried out suddenly as Maurizio and Patrizia looked at each other, puzzled. They were standing in the open corridor. There was no door. But the Sicilian crew member turned ashen. Before the reconstruction, there had been a door in that very spot, he said. The group continued to follow Frida, who walked in and out of the cabins, muttering. She stopped suddenly near the kitchen. "Leave me alone!" she shouted. The Sicilian crew member looked at her in horror, and then turned to Maurizio. "That is where Eugenia's body was found," he whispered. Suddenly, a rush of cold air swept through the vessel, chilling the small group. "What's going on here?" cried out Maurizio, trying to figure out where the current of cold air had come from. The Creole was enclosed in the construction hangar, and there were no open doors or windows that could have caused the sudden draft. At that moment, Frida snapped out of her trance. "It's all over," she said. "There are no more evil spirits on the Creole. Eugenia's ghost promised me that from now on, she will protect the Creole and its crew." Chapter 5. Family Rivalries. While Maurizio was a young man pursuing his law studies in Milan, the spectacular growth of the Gucci empire charged ahead. In 1970, Aldo had ushered in the new decade by opening a dramatic new shop on the northeast corner of 5th Avenue and 54th Street. The new Gucci store replaced an I. Miller shoe store in the 16-story French Renaissance Aeolian building at 689 5th Avenue. Aldo had called in the Weisberg and Castro architectural firm, known for its remakes of top-notch stores on New York's fashionable shopping streets. The architects created a contemporary look by using plenty of glass, imported travertine marble, and stainless steel treated to resemble bronze. Casting around for new ways to finance further expansion, Aldo called on the board of directors in 1971 to re-examine an old principle established by their late father, that ownership of the company should never leave the family. "I think we should float part of the company, which is now worth some $30 million, on the stock market," Aldo said, as his brothers listened silently. "We could sell 40%, keep 60% in the U.S. company. If we start at $10, I bet in a year we will be at 20, he said enthusiastically. "The timing is perfect," Aldo continued. "Gucci is a symbol of status and style not only with the Hollywood set, but also with traders and bankers. We must not fall behind. We have to keep pace with our competition. We can use this money to stay on top in our consolidated markets in Europe and the US, but also to move into Japan and the Far East." Rodolfo and Vasco had exchanged long glances across the massive walnut conference table in the offices above the store on Via Tornabuoni, where the directors had gathered. Neither was convinced, despite Aldo's persuasive argument. Fundamentally conservative, they didn't see the merit of their brother's ambitious plan. The Gucci business was giving them a comfortable living, and they didn't want to put their incomes at risk. With their 2/3 majority, they not only turned Aldo down, but agreed not to sell any of their shares outside the family for at least 100 years. Typically, Aldo didn't waste any time sulking. His style, as he instructed his sons, was to push ahead. "Turn the page," he would bark at the boys. "Go on, don't look back. Cry if you must, but shoot." By shoot, Aldo meant act and react, which is exactly what he did. He accelerated Gucci's expansion to high speed. New stores followed in Chicago in 1971, then in Philadelphia and San Francisco. In 1973, Aldo opened a 3rd store on 5th Avenue in New York, next to its shoe boutique at 699 5th Avenue. The new store carried fashion apparel, while the corner boutique at 689 5th Avenue carried luggage and accessories. Gucci also opened its first U.S. franchises, including Gucci boutiques in the Joseph Magnin specialty stores in San Francisco and Las Vegas. Aldo boasted publicly and privately about Gucci's great strength. It remained an entirely family-owned business. "We are like an Italian trattoria," he once said. "The whole family is in the kitchen." Now Aldo could realize his dream of opening the next frontier for Gucci, in the Far East, and in particular, Japan. For several years, Japanese shoppers had flocked to Gucci stores in Italy and the United States. Initially, even the business-minded Aldo had underestimated the importance of the Japanese consumer to the Gucci business. "I was serving a Japanese gentleman who had come into the Rome store one day," recalled Enrica Piri. "When he wasn't looking, Aldo waved me over. 'Vieni qui,' he said. 'Come here, don't you have anything better to do?' Piri made a face at her boss and shook her head. The gentleman had been looking at a series of ostrich skin bags in bright candy colors. "They were really horrible, but they were in style back in the 60s, Piri recalled. "The man kept looking at the bags and saying, 'Ahem, ahem, ahem.' I told Dr. Aldo I wanted to finish the sale. I went back to the man and he bought about 60 bags. It was the biggest single sale we had ever done," Piri said. Aldo soon changed his tune. "They have excellent taste," he told the New York Times in 1974. "I tell my staff that the Japanese are the aristocrats of customers," Aldo told a reporter in 1975. "They may not be very good looking, but right now they are the aristocrats." He also instituted a rule that the sales staff could not sell more than one bag to any one customer. He had figured out that Japanese buyers had been coming to Gucci, buying large quantities, and then reselling the bags in Japan for many times what they had paid in Italy. He realized he needed to find a way to take Gucci directly to the Japanese. Aldo received a proposal from a Japanese entrepreneur, Choichiro Motoyama, for a joint venture to operate a string of shops in Japan. The relationship was to become an important and lasting one, paving the way to Gucci's overwhelming success in the Far East. Motoyama opened the first Gucci shop in the Far East in Tokyo in 1972, under a franchise agreement. The first Hong Kong store opened in 1974, also in partnership with Motoyama. The Gucci empire now numbered 14 stores and 46 franchised boutiques around the world. In just 20 years, Aldo had built Gucci from a $6,000 corporation and a small shop in the Savoy Plaza Hotel into a glittering empire spanning the United States, Europe, and Asia. Gucci's biggest presence was in New York, where Gucci now had 3 boutiques on Fifth Avenue between 54th and 55th Streets, in what the New York Times called a sort of Gucci city. By the mid-70s, Aldo's early philosophy that the customer is always right evolved into a kind of autocratic rigidity that quickly got attention. Aldo laid down his own policies, whether or not they were in step with what other merchants were doing. He did not accept returns, for example, or give refunds or discounts. At most, a customer could exchange merchandise with the receipt within 10 days of purchase. This while most other luxury names, including Tiffany and Cartier, offered full refunds within 30 days. Anyone wishing to pay by check had to wait while the saleswoman called the bank to confirm that the funds were available. If it was a Saturday, she simply informed the customer she would hold the merchandise in the store and have it delivered on Monday after the bank approved the check. The sales staff also griped about an internal Gucci practice. At the end of the day, employees had to pick marbles, all white except for one, out of a hat. The person who picked the black marble had to have her bag searched before leaving the store. What infuriated customers most of all was Aldo's insistence on closing the store for lunch every day between 12:30 and 1:30 p.m., a practice he instituted in 1969. The custom was a carryover from Italy, where even today most stores still close between 1 and 4 p.m. The people would line up outside and start knocking on the door to get us to open, recalled Francesco Guitardi, who managed the New York store for several years in the mid-1970s. "I would look at my watch and tell them, 5 more minutes, Guitardi recalled. Aldo claimed that after experimenting with lunch shifts, he preferred to let all his employees eat at the same time. By doing so, he said, he could simultaneously promote the family-style management he was so proud of and avoid the risk of slow service because of rotating lunch breaks for the sales staff. He also said he hoped to avoid having customers come in and not find their favorite salesperson. "We would stagger the lunch hours for some of our employees, but some wouldn't have lunch until late in the afternoon," he explained to the New York Times. "So I decided that the customers would understand, and now everybody eats lunch at the same time." Instead of hurting business, the practice only seemed to raise Gucci's cachet. "What is the Gucci mystique?" queried the New York Times in December 1974, describing how customers lined up 3 deep at counters as Aldo stood, fingering his blue tie with the famous horsebit pattern, beaming at the mink coats jostling the blue jeans at the counters. The crowds swelled during the Christmas season, when Aldo himself would hold court in the store, personally signing gift packages. Customers continued to crowd into Gucci and leave irate over the service. One of the reasons was Aldo's practice of hiring the sons and daughters of prominent Italian families with little work experience. He inspired them with the intriguing offer of a glamorous job in New York and offered to put them up in one of the apartments he had rented nearby. But as the long hours, low pay, and Aldo's strict supervision took their toll, the inexperienced young people became more abrupt and less courteous with customers. Sometimes they would snicker behind customers' backs or deride them in Italian, not unlike Aldo's own behavior, thinking the customers couldn't understand them. "My Gucci story is more outrageous than yours" became one of the more popular forms of local one-upmanship among certain New York circles. By 1975, Gucci's service had become such an issue that New York Magazine dedicated a 4-page cover story to Gucci titled, "The Rudest Store in New York." Gucci staff has mastered the art of the drop-dead put-down and the icy stare, flashing signs that the customer is unworthy, wrote the author, Mimi Sheraton. Despite the rude treatment, she said, customers came back for more and paid handsomely for it. When Aldo finally agreed to an interview with Sheraton, she was rather apprehensive about meeting the man she knew was called L'Imperatore in certain circles. She was ushered into his subdued, taupe-walled office. The Aldo who came to receive her from behind a semicircular desk had come a long way from being the shy, dark-spectacled young man who had given one of his first interviews to a journalist in his Spartan office above the Rome store on Via Condotti 15 years earlier. Dressed in a shimmering palette of blues, a bright hyacinth blue linen suit, powder blue shirt, and cerulean tie touched with red that accented his china blue eyes and flushed pink complexion, Aldo bowled her over with brio. I was totally unprepared for the effusively charming, ebullient, vigorously well-preserved 70-year-old who greeted me, Sheraton wrote. He was far more colorful than his surroundings. In his most operatic style, complete with changing voice parts, he recounted Gucci's 500-year history, including its supposed saddle-making beginnings. He emphasized Gucci's pride in the quality of its products and the attention to detail. Everything must be perfect, he said with a grand sweep of his arm. Even the bricks in the walls must know they are Gucci's, he said. Despite his charming and magnetic personality, Sheraton concluded the Gucci store's reputation for snobbishness came right from the top. Gucci's rudeness is undoubtedly a reflection of what Dr. Gucci considers to be pride, but which the rest of the world recognizes as arrogance. She ended the story. Far from being offended or angry, Aldo was so thrilled with the article, he thought it was fabulous publicity, that he sent the writer flowers. Even as he continued opening new stores, Aldo also developed new Gucci product categories. He went back to the family boardroom and urged his brothers to consider selling a Gucci perfume. Again, Rodolfo and Vasco dragged their heels. Our business is leather, protested Vasco, who thought Aldo too impulsive and in need of being slowed down. What do we know about fragrance? Fragrance is the new frontier of the luxury goods market, Aldo insisted. Most of our clients are women, and everybody knows women love perfume. If we make a prestige scent that is expensive, our clients will buy it. Vasco and Rodolfo grudgingly relented, and in 1972, a new company, Gucci Perfume International Limited, was born. Aldo had a dual motive in launching the fragrance business. He was convinced it was a potentially lucrative diversification that would complement their business in leather goods. He also wanted to use the new perfume company as a vehicle to bring his sons into the business, without giving them too much power. He found scant resistance from his brothers to his proposal to include the next generation of Gucci's as a limited benefit for his sons. Vasco was indifferent, as he had no recognized heirs, and Rodolfo was battling Maurizio at the time over his marriage plans and was too angry to give his son a share in the new business. Another important category for Gucci came about when Aldo met a man named Severin Wunderman in 1968. Wunderman had grown up in the school of hard knocks, and as a result, his philosophy in life was, he who throws the first punch wins. The son of Eastern European immigrants, Wunderman was orphaned at 14. He grew up between Los Angeles, where his older sister lived, and Europe. At the age of 18, he started working for a watch wholesaler, Juvenia, now defunct. Wunderman realized that the watch business could earn him a good living. At the time he met Aldo, Wunderman was working as a U.S. salesman on commission for a French watch company called Alexis Barthollet. On a business trip to New York, where he already met with the likes of Cartier, Van Cleef, and leading jewelers up and down 47th Street, he decided to visit representatives of Gucci, who were meeting at the Hilton Hotel. Unfamiliar with the new push-button telephone in the lobby, he dialed Aldo's direct line by mistake. To Wunderman's amazement, Aldo himself picked up the phone. The two men began to speak. Aldo was waiting for a phone call from someone who was supposed to introduce him to a girl, and he thought I was stalling because I couldn't speak freely, Wunderman recalled. Not being a man of great patience, Aldo couldn't figure out why his caller wasn't getting to the point. Wunderman recounted. Finally, Aldo exploded in Florentine dialect with the equivalent of, "Who the F are you?" Wunderman understood him perfectly, because at the time he was dating a woman from Florence. "I'm not the kind of person to take something like that," Wunderman said, so I dished it right back to him. "Who the F are you?" Wunderman said. "Where are you?" barked Aldo. "Downstairs," Wunderman barked back. "Well, why don't you come upstairs so I can beat the out of you?" Wunderman marched upstairs, ready to throw the first punch. So he grabbed me and I grabbed him, and then we both looked at each other and started laughing. And that was the beginning of my relationship with Aldo and with Gucci, Wunderman said. Their relationship would go far beyond a business relationship. They not only became fast friends and sparring partners, Aldo became Wunderman's mentor, and Wunderman became one of Aldo's closest confidants. In 1972, Aldo issued Wunderman a license to manufacture and distribute watches under the Gucci name. Wunderman established his own company, Severin Montre Limited, in Irvine, California, and over the next 25 years built the Gucci watch business into one of the leading players in the business. With his street smarts and unpredictable, colorful personality, he had inched his way into the closed Swiss watchmaking establishment, securing production and distribution operations and the trade show exposition space he needed to become an industry player. Gucci became the first fashion label to become a significant Swiss watch business. Every major watch company in the world has had at least one successful model. Very few of them have had two. We had 11, Wunderman said. The first Gucci watch under the new license was another classic style called Model 2000, which Wunderman sold in collaboration with American Express in an unprecedented direct mail campaign. Overnight, sales of the Gucci watches soared from some 5,000 units to 200,000. That watch even made it into the Guinness Book of Records for selling more than 1 million units in 2 years. A women's watch, which came to be known as the Ring watch, soon followed. The watch face was set in a gold bracelet and came with changeable colored rings that clipped around it. The business was a bonanza overnight, both for Wunderman and for Gucci, which had secured a lucrative 15% royalty, considered high even today. If you went to Oshkosh, Wisconsin, and mentioned Gucci, Wunderman said, people would say, "Oh yes, they also make shoes." Wunderman, who had translated his from-the-gut intelligence into business acumen, was soon chartering private jets between his London offices and his Swiss production facilities to make the most of his workdays. And, though he may have become the bête noire of the conservative Swiss watchmaking community, doors opened quickly for him in the best restaurants and hotels around the world, which had learned to offer extra special service in exchange for Wunderman's generous tips. Wunderman would hold the Gucci watch license, the first and only watch license Gucci ever issued, for 29 years. By the late 1990s, the Gucci watch business commanded sales of some $200 million a year and generated a royalty to the tune of some $30 million, providing key income to the Gucci company in its times of greatest need. Wunderman, meanwhile, had made his own fortune, establishing sumptuous homes in California, London, Paris, and New York, and later buying his very own chateau in the south of France. During the 1970s, one event dramatically changed Gucci's ownership structure. Vasco died of lung cancer on May 31st, 1974, at the age of 67. Under Italian inheritance law, his one-third stake in the company passed to his widow, Maria. They had no children. Aldo and Rodolfo proposed to pay her for the shares in order to keep the ownership of the company in the family, and to their relief she agreed. Aldo and Rodolfo became the sole controlling shareholders of the Gucci empire, with 50% each, a shareholding ratio that would profoundly condition Gucci's future. Rodolfo, still stubbornly pursuing his confrontation with Maurizio, refused to consider sharing company ownership with him, but Aldo felt it was time to bring his boys into the Gucci mother company. He split 10% of his shares between his three sons, giving 3.3% each to Giorgio, Paolo, and Roberto. He acted as a generous and fair father, not concerned that he had given away his power to command. Any one of his sons could now ally with Rodolfo to create a 53.3% majority at the family board meetings. At the same time, the two senior brothers created a series of offshore holding companies in which they deposited their Gucci shares. Panama-based Vanguard International Manufacturing became Aldo's, Anglo-American was Rodolfo's. While the watch business took off almost immediately, Gucci's initial effort to start a perfume business on its own stumbled. The costs and the expertise required were beyond the reach of the family. Reluctant to give up, Aldo reconsolidated the venture as Gucci Parfum S.p.A. in 1975 and issued Gucci's first license to Menon to develop and distribute the first Gucci fragrance. Ownership of the new company was divided equally among Aldo, Rodolfo, and Aldo's three sons, each with 20%. Aldo secretly felt, as his sons did, that Rodolfo's 50% stake in Gucci was disproportionate to his contribution to the family business. He planned to steer more and more of the company profits into Gucci Parfum by developing a new business under its umbrella. To do so, Aldo retained the right to develop and distribute a new line of bags and accessories for sale in perfumeries as well as in Gucci stores. He also wanted to give a hand to his son, Roberto, who had a family of 6 to maintain, and so named him president of Gucci Parfum. The new line was called the Gucci Accessories Collection, or GAC. Roberto Gucci oversaw the business from Florence, while Aldo supervised its development in New York. The new line consisted of cosmetic cases, tote bags, and similar items made out of a treated canvas printed with the double G monogram and trimmed with Gucci's signature pigskin in brown or dark blue, with coordinating striped webbing. The collection was known either as GAC or as the Canvas Collection. Cheaper to produce than Gucci's handcrafted leather bags and accessories, the GAC was designed to bring the Gucci name to a wider range of consumers. The idea was to sell the Gucci cosmetic cases and totes, among other products, in perfumeries and department stores alongside the Gucci fragrances. An apparently well-intentioned and well-thought-out move that seemed in step with the times when introduced in 1979, the Gucci Accessories Collection ultimately turned into a destabilizing force in the business and family alike. Its launch represented the moment Gucci lost control over the quality factor in the business. Roberto inserted more and more products under the GAC umbrella, including notions such as lighters and pens, and the fragrance subsidiary soon started reaping higher profits than the mother company. At the time, most of the Gucci business was done through directly owned stores or franchises. In agreement with Aldo, a businesswoman named Maria Manetti Farrow, who had run Gucci's franchise shops in Joseph Magnet, began a wholesale distribution operation for GAC directed at a wider range of retailers. Also of Florentine origin, Manetti Farrow had a flair for business and zeal for success, and soon became well known in U.S. retail for her management of the GAC wholesale business. Already familiar with both production and retail operations, she took the GAC business from $0 to $45 million wholesale in just a few years, buying the canvas bags directly from the mother company in Florence and selling them to department and specialty stores across the United States. She started with 80 points of sale. By the time Gucci wrested the business back from her in 1986, Maria Manetti Farrow was selling some 600,000 pieces a year, of which some 30,000 canvas duffel bags, best sellers at $180 each, sold in more than 200 cities across the United States. She sold the GAC to more than 300 accounts for retail sales of more than $100 million. By the end of the decade, Gucci's canvas bags were sold in more than 1,000 stores across the country. I was reaching the person who didn't travel so much, people who were too intimidated to go into the shop, she explained. By the end of the 1980s, the GAC would be the product, massively distributed through department stores and cosmetic counters, that professional buyers associated with Gucci's drugstore image. The GAC also intensified another phenomenon, counterfeiting. It was much easier to copy the cheaper canvas bags than the painstakingly handcrafted leather bags. Poor quality fakes soon flooded the market. Wallets with GG initials and bags with red and green trims jammed the shops and markets of Florence and cheap accessories shops in leading U.S. cities. Aldo knew that fakes could destroy his business. "Why should a woman see an expensive handbag she has just purchased copied all over 3 months later?" Aldo observed in New York Magazine. Gucci fought a long and determined legal battle against counterfeiting. In 1977 alone, Gucci started 34 lawsuits in 6 months, including a suit to halt the manufacture of Gucci toilet paper. The precedent for that had come several years earlier when Gucci brought suit against Federated Department Stores for inscribing loaves of bread with the words Gucci Gucci Goo. Aldo didn't pursue the manufacturer of a canvas shopping bag inscribed Gucci, spelled G-O-O-C-H-Y, because he thought it was funny, but mock Gucci shoes from Venezuela, Gucci t-shirts in Miami, and a pseudo-Gucci store in Mexico City didn't amuse him. Prominent bargain hunters, Roberto Gucci told the New York Times in 1978, including the wife of a former president of Mexico, have tried to have defective goods purchased from the so-called Gucci in Mexico City repaired at the New York store, only to be told that they don't have the real thing. In the first half of 1978 alone, Gucci's legal efforts caused the confiscation of some 2,000 handbags and the liquidation of 14 Italian manufacturers of counterfeits. As the Guccis fought off threats to their name, they overlooked the greatest threat of all festering within their own ranks. Creative and eccentric Paolo, frustrated by his failure to secure a larger role within the company, had begun to butt heads with his uncle Rodolfo, to whom he reported, over the creative direction of the company, as well as its business strategies. Rodolfo, who saw himself as the creative leader of the business, didn't welcome Paolo's suggestions or criticisms. Although Aldo's gift of 3.3% in the company placated Paolo for a while, he began using his shareholder status during the family board meetings to put his ideas about design, production, and marketing on the table. Paolo, by then estranged from his wife and their 2 daughters, had found a new girlfriend, Jennifer Puddifoot, a plump, blonde Englishwoman who wanted to be a singer. Jenny, who had a biting sense of humor, had also left her failed first marriage. The couple eloped to Haiti in 1978, where he became a resident in order to marry her because of the difficult, if not impossible, prospects of obtaining a divorce from Yvonne, whom he had married in the Roman Catholic Church. 5 years later, Paolo and Jenny had a daughter, Gemma. After Vasco's death in 1974, Paolo had taken over the supervision of the Scandicci factory outside Florence. From his glassed-in office, he could see through to the order department, where large clocks on the walls showed what time it was in Gucci shops around the world. Through the other window, he could see the purchasing staff who ordered textiles and precious skins, ostrich and crocodile skins from Indonesia and North Africa, boar and pig skin from Poland, cashmere from Scotland, and bolts of GG fabric from Toledo, Ohio, where the fabric was routinely sent to Firestone for a special waterproofing process. Across the hall, the design studio was a kaleidoscope of color wheels and textile samples pinned to the walls along with sketches of handbags, buckles, watches, table linens, and pieces of china. The idyllic view from Paolo's window showed cabbage fields, rolling Tuscan countryside dotted with villas and cypress trees, and, in the distance, the dark rise and fall of the Apennine Mountains. Downstairs in the factory, sewing machines whirred and cutting machines thumped, all against the backdrop of buzzing fans used to aspirate the glue fumes. In one corner, artisans expertly passed the flames of gas torches over stiff lengths of bamboo, blackening and softening them into gently curving handles for Gucci's famous bags. Buggies rolled back and forth, filled with goods in various stages of production, some to be glued, others for stitching, cutting, or trimming, or to have the hardware attached. With the exception of more modern leather cutting and pressing equipment, the artisans used the same techniques they had on Via delle Caldaie and Lungano Guicciardini before that. After being inspected, each piece was slipped into a white flannel wrapper and prepared for shipping, as is still done today. To the workers and salespeople who watched him dart back and forth from the store and offices in Via Tornabuoni to the factory in Scandicci, Paolo was an ebullient, likable, and outlandish figure who became known for his outpouring of ideas and for dashing around in a pair of monogrammed Gucci slacks he had designed. His staff quickly learned that, like his father, he could be alternately ecstatic and furious. After a successful presentation, he would turn to his design assistant and say, "They are applauding me, but I know you did it." Yet if the same assistant contradicted him, he would throw a handful of sketches in her face and stalk out of the room. Paolo's absorbing, apparently serene life amid the rolling Tuscan hills merely masked the turbulence beneath the calm. He thought the company lacked vision and planning and disparaged his uncle Rodolfo for completely lacking organizational skills. His father, on the other hand, was a born leader, but poorly advised. "My uncle was a good actor, but as a businessman he was rubbish," Paolo once said. "He'd been smart enough to surround himself with good people, but he was no leader. My father, on the other hand, was exactly the reverse, a born leader, but with rubbishy advisors." From Florence, he wrote daily letters of complaint to his uncle Rodolfo in Milan. Gucci should license and distribute cheaper products for the younger, more hip customer. Gucci should open a second string of stores, modeled after Giorgio's successful shop in Rome. Beyond promoting his ideas, speedily rejected, about Gucci's business development, Paolo used his position at family board meetings to ask uncomfortable questions about the company finances. Sales galloped around the world. The factories in Florence produced at full speed. Gucci employed hundreds of people worldwide. Yet there never seemed to be any money in the company coffers. The year he and Jennifer married, Gucci Shops Incorporated posted a record turnover of $48 million in the United States and no profit. How was it possible? Paolo wondered aloud. Furthermore, he felt the monthly stipend he and his brothers received was hardly enough to live on. Aldo kept his boys on tight salaries to keep them humble and in line. Every once in a while, he would give them a bonus to keep them happy. "Let's give the boys something to make them smile," Aldo would say jovially, and slip something extra into their checks at the end of the month. The lack of visible profits began to cause wider consternation within the family. Rodolfo blamed the poor result on Aldo's hunger for expansion. The launch of Gucci Parfum had been expensive, and, owning only 20%, Rodolfo saw only a fraction of the profits, 80% of which went to Aldo and his sons. In turn, Paolo and his brothers resented Rodolfo's 50% stake in the mother company, which they felt had been built up by Aldo. As the written complaints from Paolo piled up on his desk in Milan, Rodolfo lost his patience. One small episode in the late 1970s that Gucci employees hardly considered unusual reportedly triggered the beginning of major conflict. One day, after arriving at the store in Via Tornabuoni, Paolo had one of Rodolfo's favorite handbags removed from the display window because he, Paolo, had not been consulted about its design. When Rodolfo learned of the change, he demanded to know who had dared to tamper with his window display. When he was told, he exploded. Shortly thereafter, at a press presentation, Rodolfo publicly upbraided Paolo, who stalked out. At another meeting in the Florence design office, handbags flew, some sailing through the open window and landing on the lawn below. The episode became part of Gucci lore after the following morning. The custodian found the bags outside on the ground upon opening the plant and called the police, thinking there had been a theft. "This was business as usual," recalled a former employee, referring to the flying bags. "That kind of thing happened all the time." But Paolo's critical letters and insolent behavior had become too much for Rodolfo. He confronted his nephew angrily on the telephone, summoning him to his office in Milan. When Paolo was shown into Rodolfo's office over the Via Monte Napoleone, Rodolfo wasted little time. "I have had enough of your insolence," he shouted. "I am finished with you. If you can't make it in Italy, then you had better go work for your father in New York." Paolo counterattacked, demanding to see the company's books. "I am a Gucci director and shareholder," he shot back. "I have a right to know what is going on in this company. What is happening to all the millions of dollars that are pouring in here?" Paolo called his father and claimed Rodolfo was obstructing his rights within the company, undercutting his role as design director, initiating things without consulting him. Aldo, ever the peacemaker, waved the problem aside and invited Paolo to come work for him in New York. "You need a break, Paolo," Aldo said benevolently on the other end of the telephone. "America is a wonderful place to live and work. You can take charge of accessories and design here. Jenny will like it too. Perhaps she can advance her singing career." Paolo and Jenny were thrilled. Aldo gave Paolo and Jenny an apartment less than 5 minutes by foot from the Fifth Avenue store and made him vice president of marketing and managing director of Gucci Shops Incorporated and Gucci Parfum of America, with an executive salary to go with the position. An ecstatic Paolo brimmed over with new ideas to exploit the seemingly unlimited potential of the U.S. marketplace. It was 1978. In 1980, Aldo opened a glamorous new store across 54th Street at 685 Fifth Avenue in the former Columbia Pictures building, which he bought in 1977. Workmen hollowed out the first 4 floors of the 16-story building while maintaining elevators and other services for tenants on the floors above. It cost $1.8 million alone to install new steel and concrete girders in the open space to keep the building supported. By the time it was finished, the store featured a spacious atrium in which the huge tapestry, The Judgment of Paris, woven in 1583 for the Grand Duke Francesco de' Medici, hung between a pair of glass-walled elevators. The first 3 floors, again designed by New York architects Weisberg and Castro, were finished in glass, travertine marble, and statuary bronze. The first floor showcased handbags and accessories, the second men's products, and the third women's. This store remained with essentially the same decor until it was closed for renovation under Gucci's current management in 1999. Aldo invested more than $12 million in the venture, including $6 million alone in an art collection that he hung on the 4th floor of the shop, the Gucci Galleria, designed by Giulio Savio of Rome. For years, marrying art with commerce, he had organized impromptu spaghetti dinners for friends after concerts by the Italian tenor Luciano Pavarotti, also a friend. Gradually, these events evolved from informal gatherings to gala benefits, such as the 1978 first night of Don Pasquale with Beverly Sills. Gucci contributed to the evening by sponsoring a gala dinner and Gucci fashion show after the performance. Aldo hired Lina Rossellini, the wife of Renzo Rossellini, the brother of film director Roberto Rossellini, as a VIP hostess in his belief that personal contact was the best advertising for Gucci. Mrs. Rossellini, as she was always referred to, was well connected socially in New York, and always welcomed important customers to the Galleria. She graciously ushered them over to soft taupe couches and easy chairs where white-gloved waiters served coffee or champagne on travertine marble tables. There they could admire originals by De Chirico, Modigliani, Van Gogh, and Gauguin, among paintings by other artists, and choose limited edition Gucci-designed jewelry or handbags made of precious skins and featuring 18-karat gold hardware priced from $3,000 to $12,000. "You may ask, where are the people to buy these things in time of recession?" Aldo said to Women's Wear Daily, the eve of the opening. "I have a saying about beautiful women," Aldo continued, answering his own question. "Only 5% are truly beautiful. And it's the same with people of great possibility. They are only 5% of the population. But 5% is enough to make us smile." He predicted that the Gucci U.S. business would hit $55 to $60 million by the fiscal year ending August 1981. One of Paolo's favorite tasks was personally to hand over to VIP clients Gucci's gold-plated key, another one of Aldo's inventions, that granted them access to the Galleria. In no time at all, the little gold key, fewer than 1,000 were issued, became a must-have in certain New York circles. Gucci, by then considered the ultimate in class and style, was imprinted on the American mentality as top-of-the-line chic. In 1978, the characters in Neil Simon's California Suite all carried Gucci luggage and even mentioned it by name. To set the scene for his 1979 film Manhattan, Woody Allen rolled his cameras in front of Gucci's gleaming Fifth Avenue windows. Ronald Reagan wore Gucci moccasins while Nancy carried the bamboo bag for everyday use and picked up Gucci's satin slippers and beaded evening bags for special occasions. Sidney Poitier's joke went around the world. During a trip to Africa, a journalist asked the actor how it felt to set foot on the soil of his ancestors. With a withering glance, he retorted, "Fine, through the soles of my Gucci shoes." In 1978, gossip columnist Susie referred to Peter Dutchin in the Daily News Sunday as the Gucci of all society orchestra leaders. In 1981, Time magazine described the new Volkswagen as a new subcompact four-seater design that looks more like a Gucci slipper than a car. While Paolo enjoyed his New York life, his uncle had not forgotten his nephew's campaign against him. Rodolfo resented Aldo's breezy solution and Paolo's leaving his Italian post with no notice or replacement. Now that Maurizio was back in Rodolfo's good graces, the elder Gucci could no longer accept that Paolo had more standing in the company than his own son. In April 1978, Rodolfo wrote a letter in his own hand to Paolo, firing him from the Italian company for failing to carry out his duties at the factory in Florence. The equivalent of a declaration of war on Aldo, the letter showed that Rodolfo felt he had been provoked beyond toleration. Paolo received the letter early one morning in New York, as he was leaving home to head for the store. Rather than frighten him, it only made him more determined. "If they are going to kill me, I am going to kill them," he told Jenny. He vowed to destroy Rodolfo's position in the company through the power his own father wielded. He reckoned that the growing importance of the Gucci parfum business with the lucrative Gucci accessories collection, of which Rodolfo only had 20%, would weaken his uncle's bargaining power. The problem was that Paolo didn't get on much better with his father. While Maurizio humored Aldo, Paolo clashed with him. Working side by side constantly frustrated them both. Aldo was authoritarian and all-encompassing and had his own very clear ideas about how he wanted things done. "I wasn't allowed to do anything," Paolo complained. "I had no authority." When, for a change, Paolo had handbags stuffed with colored tissue paper instead of white, he incurred Aldo's wrath. "Don't you know colors fade? You idiot!" Aldo screamed. Or when he sent back goods that had been ordered but arrived late, Aldo fumed. "We've been working with these suppliers for years. You can't treat them like that." They also disagreed over the advertising budget and the catalog because of Aldo's preference for promoting Gucci by word of mouth. Only Paolo's window displays, which won recognition, seemed to please Aldo. Until Paolo hired the hot young window dresser of the moment, and Aldo fired him the first day on the job. Even socially, Aldo was the only Gucci who ranked in New York. Dubbed the guru of Gucci by the press, only Aldo appeared in the whirlwind of fashion-related Gucci benefits. Paolo found his father's tyrannical ways insufferable and wondered what to do. Going back to Florence was out of the question for him. Since he had built up a circle of friends and contacts in New York, he explored the possibility of doing something under his own name. It didn't take long for his family to get wind of his plans. "Aldo, what is that Bisquero of your son up to?" Rodolfo shouted into the telephone from his office in Scandicci. He had heard from several local suppliers that Paolo had approached them about his own line, the PG collection. And it wasn't just talk. There were styles, prices, delivery dates, and the distribution plan was massive. He even wanted to sell in supermarkets, according to one report. Aldo hung up the phone, livid. Paolo had completely miscalculated his father's reaction. Instead of siding with him against Rodolfo, Aldo was furious with his own son. Even though Aldo and Rodolfo argued constantly, when it came to protecting the well-being of the company, they were united. They both perceived Paolo as a threat to the Gucci name and all they had achieved. Aldo thumped his fist on his desk and raged. After all he had done for Paolo, this was his thanks. He called Paolo to his offices over the Fifth Avenue store. The premises trembled from his shouting. "Bisquero, you are fired! You are an idiot to try to compete with us! A fantastic idiot! I cannot protect you anymore!" "Why are you letting them kill me?" Paolo shot back. "I only wanted to make the company better, not destroy it. If you fire me, I will found my own company, and then we will see who is right." He stormed out of the store and called his lawyer, Stuart Spacer. A few days later, the papers were filed for the registration of the new trademark, PG. It wasn't long before his own father's dismissal letter arrived, a registered letter from the board of directors dated September 23, 1980. When Paolo realized that there was no severance provision after 26 years with the company, he went to court again, filing papers against the mother company in Italy, which served to convince Rodolfo even more that Paolo was a potent danger. The family convened a board meeting in Florence, to which Paolo was not invited, and authorized some $8 million to fight Paolo's venture. Giorgio, who had tried to stay out of these family battles, was there, as was Roberto, who felt Paolo had gone too far in wanting to have everything his way. He had tried to reason with his brother. "You can't be a part of us and be a competitor at the same time. If you want to play, respect the rules of the game. You can't fight the company and remain inside it. If you want to go your own way, then sell your shares." Paolo resented the pressure against him. Everybody else was protecting their own interests within the company. I didn't see why I shouldn't have pursued my own, he said. Rodolfo made sure Maurizio was present at the meeting too, even though he was not a shareholder. Rodolfo had been diagnosed with prostate cancer, and although still highly active in the company, he wanted to bring Maurizio into the fray as quickly as possible. You must fight Paolo with everything you have got, Rodolfo confided to Maurizio privately. He must be defeated, utterly and quickly. He is threatening everything we have, and I will not be here forever. By that time, Rodolfo was nearly 70 years old and undergoing intensive radiation therapy to try to halt the cancer. The Gucci company sprang into action against Paolo, hiring lawyers, instantly putting all the licensees Paolo had contacted on notice that any attempt to distribute products under the Paolo Gucci name would be blocked. Rodolfo personally wrote to all of Gucci's suppliers that anyone who did business with Paolo would be dropped. The battle against counterfeiters was just a skirmish compared to this. Family conflict had escalated into a full-fledged trade war. Over the next decade, the family war would pull back the curtains on the normally private world of a closely held family business, revealing shifting alliances, sudden betrayals, and rapprochements widely characterized in the press as a Dallas on the Arno, but actually more reminiscent of the intrigues of Niccolò Machiavelli's Renaissance Florence.